The workshop was gutted. Every dining set, every cabinet, every hand tool gone. Shadow outlines on the pegboard walls where 41 years of chisels and planes once hung. I called my son-in-law, Bryce Calloway. He answered the way you'd answer a question about the weather. You're too old to notice anything. I handled it while you were down. I said nothing. Hung up. Walked to my home office, opened the fireproof lockbox, and pulled out the catalog ledger. Before we continue, tap subscribe and drop in the comments what time it is for you. Thank you for your support. My name is Amos Krejci. I'm 63 years old, and until 6 weeks ago, I could identify any piece of wood by smell alone. White oak has a vinegar bite. Cherry carries something sweet, almost like warm fruit. Walnut smells like earth after rain. I learned that at 17, standing in Heinrich Voss's shop on Wayne Street in Sandusky, Ohio, with sawdust in my hair and shellac under my fingernails. Heinrich was a German cabinet maker who'd been building furniture since before my parents left Czechoslovakia. 71 years old when I walked into his shop looking for work. He didn't ask for a resume. He handed me a block of poplar and a hand plane and told me to make one face flat. It took me 4 hours. The face wasn't flat. Heinrich picked up the block, held it to the light, and ran his thumb across the surface. Again, he said. I spent 3 days on that block. When I finally got it right, Heinrich set it on his workbench and nodded once. That was his version of applause. He taught me mortise and tenon joinery first. Not because it was the most important joint, but because it was the most honest. A mortise tells you if you're paying attention, he said. Force the chisel and the grain splits. Follow the grain and the joint holds for 100 years. I followed the grain. For 3 years, I followed it. 6 days a week, 8 hours a day. Learning to read wood the way some people read faces. Heinrich didn't talk much. When he did, it mattered. One Tuesday afternoon, 6 months into my apprenticeship, Heinrich pulled a walnut cabinet off the showroom floor and carried it to the back of the shop. He set it on the bench, opened the bottom drawer, and removed it from its track. Then he reached inside the cabinet carcass and pressed his thumb against the interior joint where the drawer slide met the side panel. Feel, he said. I reached in. My fingers found a small brass plate recessed into the wood, flush with the surface, invisible unless you knew where to look. Every piece I build carries my name, Heinrich said, where nobody can see it. Not for the customer. Not for money, for the work itself. He pulled out the plate and showed me. His initials, HJV, a serial number, a date, stamped into brass and routed into a joint that would never be seen by anyone who wasn't looking for it. A man's name should live inside his work, Heinrich said. If you build something worth building, sign it. Not on the surface where people can admire it. Inside where the wood holds it. I wouldn't understand the full weight of that lesson for another 40 years. But I'm getting ahead of myself. At 22, I opened Krejci Custom Woodworks with a table saw, a hand plane, and $1,200 I'd borrowed against my parents' hardware store on Columbus Avenue. My father, Amos Krejci, who'd emigrated from Plzeň with $19 and a suitcase, signed the loan paperwork without hesitation. My mother, Bisera, packed me a lunch for my first day in the shop like I was going to school. The shop was a rented barn off Route 2, east of town. No heat, no insulation, a single overhead bulb, and whatever natural light came through the sliding door. I set up the table saw on a concrete slab, hung my hand planes on a pegboard I'd built from scrap, and waited for customers. The first commission came from Pastor Alan Reed at First Presbyterian, who wanted a rocking chair for his wife's birthday. Cherry, simple lines, comfortable for a woman with a bad hip. I spent 3 weeks on that chair. Selected the lumber myself from a mill in Huron County, let it acclimate in the barn for a week, then cut, shaped, and assembled it by hand. Before I closed the seat joint, I routed a small recess into the wood where the rocker met the underside of the seat. I pressed a brass nameplate into the slot. Serial number 001. Initials, Aj K. Date, March 14, 1984. Nobody would ever see it unless they flipped the chair upside down and knew where to press. That was the point. I decided that day, every piece I built would carry the same hidden signature. Everyone. No exceptions. Not for pride, for proof. If I built it, it would know my name. The rocking chair sold for $380. I used $200 to buy more lumber. The rest went to my parents against the loan. Work came. Slow at first, then steady. A dining table for the Brennan family on Perkins Avenue. A bookcase for Dr. Silvers at the medical clinic. A set of end tables for the Rotary Club auction. Each piece, catalogued, numbered, signed in brass where the joints met. By the time I was 30, I'd outgrown the barn. I bought a 2-acre lot on the east side of town and built the workshop from scratch. Post and beam construction. I cut the beams myself from white oak logs hauled from a farm in Norwalk. It took 14 months working evenings and weekends, while I filled orders during the day. When it was done, I had a proper shop floor with room for a saw-stop table saw, a Powermatic lathe, a 16-inch jointer, and wall-mounted racks organized the way Heinrich taught me. Everything in its place. Every tool within reach. I added a showroom the following year. Pendant lighting. Hardwood floors. Display stands for finished pieces with handwritten provenance cards beside each one. That showroom was Lena's idea. Lena Devochakova walked into the workshop on a Wednesday in September 1989. She was 26, dark-haired, carrying a notebook and a pencil behind her ear. She said she'd heard I needed help with bookkeeping. I didn't know I needed help with bookkeeping. Lena told me I did. She was right. Within a month, she was managing the books. Within a year, she was managing me. She filed every receipt, organized every invoice, tracked every dollar in and out of the business. She was the one who suggested the catalog ledger, a bound notebook where every finished piece was recorded by hand, serial number, wood species, dimensions, completion date, buyer name, sale price, and a small pencil sketch of the finished piece. You sign them on the inside, she said. I'll sign them on the page. Her handwriting was better than mine. Smaller, neater. Each entry, a record that connected the hidden brass nameplate to a customer, a date, a story. She wrote notes in the margins, too, cross-references, reminders, things I never bothered to read. I wish I had. The ledger grew thick over the years. She filled 3 notebooks before switching to a larger format. Each one stored in the fireproof lockbox in our home office. We married in 1991. Small ceremony. Her family, my family. Heinrich Voss sitting in the front row in his only suit. The reception was in the workshop showroom, tables pushed together, food brought by neighbors. Heinrich gave us a hand plane as a wedding gift. German steel, beechwood handle, blade sharp enough to shave with. I still have it. Lena did something else that first year. Something I didn't appreciate at the time. She called her friend Marguerite Fontaine, a young estate attorney who'd just opened a practice on Columbus Avenue. Maggie drove her old Volvo to the workshop, sat at the bench with Lena and me, and drafted a formal LLC operating agreement for Krejci Custom Woodworks. Lena insisted on a specific provision, page 7, clause 4. No asset transfer, sale, or dissolution exceeding $5,000 without dual signature notarization from both managing members. I barely read it. Just sign, Amos, Lena said. Trust me. I signed. Maggie filed it with Erie County. The document went into the lockbox. I forgot about it. Lena didn't forget. She never forgot anything. The years stacked up the way good lumber seasons. The serial numbers climbed past 100, past 400, past 1,000. I built dining sets for families across northern Ohio. Custom pieces, each one requiring weeks of design consultation before I touched the first board. I'd sit with the family in their home, measure the room, study the light, ask what kind of meals they cooked, and how many chairs they needed, and whether their kids climbed on furniture. Then I'd go back to the shop and select the lumber. I completed a full set of library shelving for the Sandusky Public Library. 14 sections, white oak, floor to ceiling, serial numbers 412 through 425. The library director shook my hand when we installed the last piece and said it was the finest work he'd seen in 30 years. I didn't tell him about the brass nameplates hidden inside each shelf standard. He didn't need to know. 3 churches commissioned pews: Calvary Methodist, First Baptist, Stent; Hall's Lutheran. Oak for 2, cherry for 1. Each pew signed inside the kneeler joint. Erie County Courthouse ordered courtroom furniture. 2 counsel tables, a judge's bench, and gallery seating. The judge, a man named Harlan Whitfield, watched me install the bench and asked if I'd consider building furniture for the new courthouse annex. I said yes. Decades passed. The serial numbers climbed past 1,500. Each entry in the ledger matched a brass nameplate, matched a piece of furniture somewhere in northern Ohio, sitting in someone's dining room or library or church, carrying my initials where nobody could see them. Lena maintained every page. Her pencil sketches in the margins got better over the years. She developed a system of provenance cards for the showroom, small printed cards displayed beside each piece, connecting the serial number to the customer-facing presentation. People liked knowing their table had a number, a history. It made the work feel like it would last. "You build the furniture," she told me once. "I build the record. Between the two of us, nothing gets lost." She was protecting something she could see that I couldn't. I know that now. She was building armor against a threat that hadn't arrived yet, filing it in a lockbox I opened once a year. Decades passed. Amos builds, Lena catalogs. That was our rhythm. Morning coffee in the kitchen, then the workshop until evening. She'd bring lunch at noon and sit on the bench reading while I worked. Sometimes she'd spot-check the ledger against the showroom inventory, counting nameplates, cross-referencing entries. I teased her about it. "Nobody's going to steal a dining table, Lena." She fixed me with a look that could strip varnish. "You'd be surprised what people steal when they think nobody's watching." I didn't think about that comment again until the showroom was empty. The ledger reached serial number 1-800, then 1-800-100, then 8-000. The workshop had become a landmark in Sandusky. Families commissioned pieces for weddings, anniversaries, retirements. Each occasion recorded in the growing catalog, each nameplate stamped and hidden, each page in Lena's handwriting. Then the diagnosis: pancreatic cancer, stage 3. The oncologist at Cleveland Clinic used words like survival rates and treatment protocols and quality of life. Quality of life. As if you could measure that. She organized her medical files. She updated the ledger through her first round of chemotherapy. She made phone calls I didn't know about until later. One of those calls was to Maggie Fontaine. The treatment didn't work. The cancer spread. Lena came home for the last time in November, thin and gray and still sharper than anyone in the room. I built her a walnut jewelry box with dovetail corners. Serial number 1-1847. I routed the brass nameplate into the bottom, my initials and the date. I placed it on her nightstand the day she came home. She picked it up, turned it over, and found the nameplate with her fingertip, the way she always did. She smiled. "Still signing your work," she said. "Always. Good." Don't stop. 3 weeks. That was all we had left. She died on a Tuesday morning, pancreatic cancer, age 61. The funeral was at Calvary Methodist, in the same pews I'd built 15 years earlier. After the service, I went to the workshop. I stood on the shop floor with the Powermatic lathe humming behind me and the pendant lights casting warm circles on the empty bench. The house was quiet in a way I couldn't stand. The workshop was quiet in a way I could. Silence in the house meant Lena was gone. Silence in the workshop meant my hands still worked. I started a cherry dining set that October, the October after she died. 8 chairs, extension leaf, hand-carved apron. 16-hour days. I finished it in November and started a white oak credenza the same week. Serial number 1848. Then 18049. Then 18050. Each nameplate stamped in the quiet where Lena used to talk. The ledger continued. My handwriting was rougher than hers, my sketches less precise. But the entries were complete. Serial number, wood species, dimensions, date, buyer, price. Every piece accounted for. The fireproof lockbox held the ledger, the LLC agreement, the original business formation documents, 41 years of signed invoices. Lena's handwriting still labeled the filing cabinet drawers in the home office. I left them that way. On Tuesday evenings, I'd sit at the roll-top desk in that office and check into the weekly ham radio net. W8H, my call sign. Tuesday nights on the radio. Talking to strangers in Indiana, Michigan, Wisconsin. A different world. A world that had nothing to do with grief or sawdust or empty chairs at the kitchen table. 6 months after Lena's death, my back gave out. Herniated disc, L4, L5. The surgeon at Firelands Regional said, I needed a laminectomy and 6 to 8 weeks of recovery. No lifting, no bending, no standing at a workbench. My daughter Diana called that evening. You're recovering at our house, Dad. No argument. Diana was 36, a dental hygienist at a practice on Perkins Avenue. She'd married Bryce Calloway 8 years earlier after a 6-month courtship that I'd thought was too fast, and Lena had thought was a disaster. We never said that to Diana. Parents learn which truths to hold in reserve. Diana had Lena's dark hair and my stubbornness, a combination that made her difficult to redirect once she'd decided something. She'd decided I was recovering at her house. So I was recovering at her house. Their place was a 4-bedroom colonial in a subdivision off Route 250. 2-car garage, mowed lawn, a mortgage payment I suspected was heavier than Bryce let on. The guest bedroom was on the first floor, adjacent to the kitchen. Thin drywall between rooms. I could hear the refrigerator cycling on and off, the television in the living room, every conversation at the kitchen table. My grandson Theo helped me carry my bag to the guest room the first night. 14 years old, quiet, with his mother's dark eyes and a habit of watching people the way I watched. He'd been spending weekends at my workshop since he was 10, learning to use hand planes, asking questions about joinery that his friends would have found boring. His hands were already steady. He had the patience. I'll bring your dinner later, Grandpa, Theo said. Thanks, buddy. Is the workshop locked? It is. Theo nodded. He understood what the workshop meant without being told. Then there was Bryce. Bryce Calloway was 38, with the soft build of a man who peaked in high school athletics and hadn't adjusted his self-image to match. Sandy blonde hair thinning at the crown, compensated with styling gel. A round, boyish face that made people trust him on first meeting. Blue eyes that went flat when he was calculating, which was often. He worked as a finance manager at a used car dealership on Milan Road. Sport coats over polo shirts. Khaki pants. A chunky stainless steel watch he wore like a trophy. I'd seen the credit card statement once, by accident, on the kitchen counter. He was still making payments on that watch. Bryce was the kind of man who'd read a book about handshakes. Firm grip, 3 seconds, eye contact. He called me sir every time we spoke face to face. He called me the old man when he thought the kitchen wall was thicker than it was. I'd never confronted him about it. I filed it the way I filed everything. Noted, dated, stored. He'd married Diana after meeting her at a friend's barbecue. He was drawn to the family, I think. To the workshop, the farmhouse, the appearance of solid ground beneath solid people. Bryce was a man who'd been almost successful his entire life. Almost made varsity starting lineup. Almost got the scholarship to Bowling Green. Almost closed the big financing deal at the dealership. Being near success was enough for him. Standing close to something real made him feel real. Marrying into the Krejci family was the closest he'd come to the thing itself. Lena saw through him in 10 minutes. She never said so directly. She just made sure the LLC agreement was ironclad and the lockbox was fireproof. The morning of my surgery, I locked the workshop, set the alarm on the farmhouse, and drove to Firelands Regional with Diana. Bryce stayed home. "I'll hold down the fort, sir," he said from the driveway, that smile wide and practiced. The workshop inventory on the day I went under anesthesia, 214 finished and in-progress pieces currently in the workshop. Brass nameplates installed, serial numbers logged in the catalog ledger. Combined value exceeding $200,000. The ledger sat in the fireproof lockbox in my home office, beside the LLC operating agreement, beside 41 years of invoices and tax records and filing cabinets still labeled in Lena's handwriting. Bryce had never entered that room. He glanced through the door once, seen the ham radio and the QSL cards and the old filing cabinets, and dismissed it. "What's all that junk in there?" he'd asked Diana. She'd shrugged. He'd moved on. Every document in that room survived because Bryce never thought to open the door. The anesthesia hit at 7,042 in the morning. I counted backward from 10 and made it to 6. The last thing I saw was the overhead light in the surgical suite, round and white. It reminded me of the pendant lamps in the showroom. The workshop sat unlocked. No security cameras. No alarm system beyond a deadbolt I'd installed myself 20 years ago. $200,000 of handcrafted furniture, with nothing between it and the road but a sliding barn door and an old man's trust. Bryce drove to the workshop that afternoon. I know because Theo told me later, much later, in a voice that shook. Bryce stood in the showroom doorway with his phone in his hand. He wasn't looking at the furniture the way a customer looks at it, weighing beauty and craft. He was looking at it the way a man looks at a bank account he's just discovered the password to. From the upstairs window of the subdivision house, Theo watched a rented box truck back into the workshop driveway. The driver cut the engine. Bryce walked to the back of the truck and rolled up the door. Theo didn't understand what he was seeing. His grandfather had told him nobody should touch the workshop. But his father was there, directing, pointing, and 2 men Theo didn't recognize were climbing out of the truck cab with moving blankets and hand dollies. Something was wrong. Theo couldn't name it. He was 14. But his grandfather had taught him the same thing Heinrich Voss taught a 17-year-old apprentice in a dusty shop on Wayne Street. The same thing I'd taught Theo every weekend at the workbench. Pay attention. When something feels wrong, it is. Theo reached for his phone. The first week, Bryce played the part. He helped me to the bathroom at 6 in the morning, one hand under my elbow, the other braced against my hip where the surgical tape still pulled. He brought breakfast on a tray. Scrambled eggs, toast, coffee with 1 sugar. The way I take it. He'd learned that somewhere. Probably asked Diana, "How are we feeling today, sir?" "We." He hadn't been cut open. "Better," I said. Good. That's good. Anything you need, you just holler. He said it 3 times that first day. Just holler. The kind of phrase a man uses when he wants credit for offering without risk of being taken up on it. But I gave him the benefit of the doubt. Lena would have said I gave too much of it to too many people. And she'd have been right. But the man was married to my daughter. He was Theo's father. So when he stood in the guest room doorway with that practiced smile and asked if I needed another pillow, I said, "Thank you," and meant it. By the second Tuesday, the egg stopped. Bryce dropped a granola bar on the nightstand at 7:15 without breaking stride toward the front door. Running late, Diana left coffee in the pot. The coffee was cold by the time I walked to the kitchen. My back seized twice on the 20-foot trip. I stood at the counter gripping the edge of the sink, waiting for the muscle to release, staring at a pot of coffee that had been sitting since 6. I poured a cup, drank it cold, washed the mug, walked back to the guest room. That was Tuesday. By Thursday, nobody mentioned breakfast at all. Week 3, I lay in the guest room most of the day. Diana left for the dental office at 7:30. Bryce left at 7, sometimes earlier. He said the dealership needed him for early inventory counts. I delivered a credenza to a dealership owner's office on Route 2 back in 1997. Inventory counts don't start at 6:45 in the morning. Theo was at school until 3. Between 7:30 and 3 o'clock, the house was mine, and mine alone. I cataloged the sounds the way I cataloged serial numbers, the furnace kicking on at irregular intervals, the ice maker cycling in the kitchen, a drip somewhere in the upstairs bathroom that nobody had fixed. And through the drywall between the guest room and the kitchen, Bryce's voice. He came home late, 11, sometimes midnight. He'd sit at the kitchen table, and I'd hear him open a beer, then the soft tap of his phone screen. The first call I overheard was a Thursday night, week 2. I couldn't sleep. The pain medication had worn off 4 hours earlier, and nobody had picked up the refill. Bryce's voice came through the wall at 11:40. Put another 5 on the spread. Yeah, the over. A pause. I know what the line is. I'm telling you, double down. Another pause. Longer. I'm good for it. When have I not been good for it? I didn't understand the language. Not yet. I heard numbers. I heard odds. I heard the word spread used in a way that had nothing to do with furniture dimensions or wood grain. But the tone was what I noted. Tight. Controlled. The voice of a man holding something together with both hands. 2 nights later, the same thing. 12:15 in the morning. 300 on the second half. No, 3. I said 300. But pause. Because I'm up. I'm telling you, I'm up. This covers last week. That phrase covers last week. I turned it over in my mind the way I'd turn a piece of cherry, looking for the direction of the grain. Something was being paid with something else. A debt canceling a debt. I noted the date, noted the time, noted the words. The same attention I brought to logging a serial number in the catalog ledger. Bryce's attitude changed at the same pace as his phone calls. Week 1, he'd knock on the guest room door before entering. Week 2, he'd open it without knocking and stand in the doorway. Week 3, I heard him talking to Diana in the kitchen after dinner. The drywall did its work. He's fine, Diana. He just sits there all day. He's recovering from surgery, Bryce. I know. I'm just saying, how long does this go on? The room smells like Bengay every time I walk past. Diana said something I couldn't make out. Bryce's voice dropped. But not enough. Your dad doesn't need the good plates, babe. Paper's fine for the guest room. Paper plates. 41 years of building dining tables for families, and my son-in-law wanted to serve me dinner on paper. I said nothing. There was nothing to say yet. Then came the questions about the workshop. The first one landed during a Sunday dinner, week 3. Diana had cooked pot roast. Bryce sat across from me, Theo beside me, and Diana. At the head of the table, Lena would have occupied. So, Amos. Bryce cut his meat with the enthusiasm of a man who'd just won something. What happens to all that furniture if you can't work anymore? The table went quiet. Theo looked up from his plate. I can work, I said. Sure. But hypothetically, that's a lot of inventory just sitting there. It's not sitting. It's waiting for me to get back. Bryce nodded, chewing. Right. But inventory loses value the longer it sits. Market's changing. Custom furniture's a tough sell these days. I've been selling custom furniture for 41 years. Different world now, sir. He pointed his fork at me. Dealership gesture. Closing technique. Online, mass production, all that. I'm just saying, maybe there's a smarter play. I looked at him. He held my gaze for 2 seconds, then looked down at his plate. The shop is not your concern, Bryce. I said it the way Heinrich taught me to set a chisel. Level, 1 strike, clean edge. Bryce laughed. The sound came out too fast, too high. Just trying to help, sir. He reached for the salt and changed the subject to the Browns' defensive line. That night, 11:50, through the wall. He said no, but he's on painkillers half the time. He won't remember by morning. A pause. I know what I'm doing. Just give me another week. I lay in the dark and replayed the sentence. He said no, but he's on painkillers half the time. He won't remember by morning. My pain medication was ibuprofen. Over the counter. I hadn't taken a prescription painkiller since the 3rd day post-surgery. Bryce knew this because he'd complained about picking up the ibuprofen from the pharmacy. Couldn't they just give you the good stuff so we don't have to keep refilling? He was telling someone I was medicated into confusion, building a narrative. The old man's on painkillers. He won't remember. A setup for whatever came next. I remembered every word. Theo became my source. He'd knock on the guest room door after school, backpack still on, and sit on the floor beside the bed with his homework spread across the carpet. He didn't need to sit there. His room was upstairs, bigger, with a desk and a lamp. But he sat on my floor, and I understood why without asking. Grandpa, what's the difference between quarter sawn and flat sawn? Quarter sawn, the annual rings run perpendicular to the face. Flat sawn, they run parallel. Quarter sawn's more stable. Less likely to cup or warp. Which one's harder to make? Quarter sawn takes more lumber to produce. You lose wood, but what you keep is better. He wrote that down in his notebook. Not for school, for the workshop. On a Tuesday, week 4, Theo mentioned it between algebra problems. Dad was at the workshop today. I kept my voice level. When? This afternoon? After school. I mean, during school for me, but I forgot my lunch and Mom drove me back, and I saw Dad's car in the workshop lot. What time? Maybe 1:30? He told Mom he was at the dealership. Did you see him go inside? Theo nodded. He had his phone out, like he was taking pictures or something. Bryce told Diana he worked late at the dealership on Tuesdays. The dealership was on Milan Road, 10 minutes east. The workshop was on the east side of town, 15 minutes in the other direction. Theo, yeah? If you see your dad at the workshop again, pay attention. What he's doing. Who's with him. What time? The boy looked at me with those dark eyes. Is something wrong, Grandpa? Maybe. I'm not sure yet. Should I tell Mom? Not yet. Just watch. Document what you see. He nodded. Serious. 14 years old, and he understood the weight of that word. Document. I'd taught him what it meant over weekends at the workbench. Every cut measured twice. Every joint marked before assembly. Every mistake recorded so you don't repeat it. Okay, Grandpa. 3 days later, Bryce tried again. This time without Diana in the room. He knocked on the guest room door at 9 in the evening, which was unusual. He leaned against the doorframe, with his arms crossed, and that smile arranged on his face. "Hey, Amos, I've been thinking." "About what?" "The medical bills. They're adding up. The surgery, the physical therapy, all of it. My insurance covers most of it. Most isn't all. And, look, I've been doing some research." He pulled his phone from his back pocket and showed me the screen. Some furniture listing website. Custom pieces are selling well online right now. If I moved a few things from the workshop, we could cover the gap, and then some. I said no. I know. But think about it. You're here, recovering. Nobody's using that space. The pieces are just. Bryce. He stopped. The answer is no. It was no last week. It will be no next week. His smile tightened. Not at the mouth, at the eyes. The blue went flat, the way it did when he was calculating something he didn't want me to see. "You're the boss, sir." He pushed off the door frame and left without closing the door. I heard his footsteps cross the kitchen, heard the beer cap twist off, heard him sit at the table with his phone. 3 minutes later, through the wall, he's not going to budge. We'll have to do this without his say-so. A pause. The old man can barely get to the bathroom. He's not driving out to the workshop anytime soon. The thermostat read 62 degrees. The house was set to 68. I knew because I'd checked the hallway unit when I walked to the bathroom that morning. 68 in the living room, 68 in the kitchen, 62 in the guest room. Nobody had adjusted the vent, or somebody had. I asked Diana about it. She said the vents in the older part of the house sometimes ran cold. "I'll have Bryce look at it." He never looked at it. I spent 5 weeks sleeping in a 62-degree room while the rest of the house ran at 68. Small thing, easy to dismiss. But I'd spent 41 years running a workshop where temperature and humidity mattered. You control the environment, or the environment controls the work. The guest room environment was telling me something about my standing in this house. The meals followed the same trajectory as the thermostat. Week 1, hot breakfast, lunch prepared, dinner at the table with the family. Week 3, cold leftovers in the refrigerator, sometimes with a note from Diana saying, "Help yourself," sometimes with nothing at all. Week 4, Theo knocked on my door at 6:30 one evening with a plate of spaghetti he'd made himself. Sauce from a jar. Noodles slightly overcooked. He set it on the nightstand. "Mom forgot," he said. No accusation in his voice. Just a fact. "Thank you, Theo. It's not very good. It's hot. That counts for a lot." He sat on the floor and watched me eat. I asked him about school. He told me about a history project on the Erie Canal. I told him about the white oak lock gates I'd seen photographs of at the Sandusky Maritime Museum. We talked for 20 minutes about water and wood and how the two interact. Normal conversation. Grandfather and grandson. It was the best meal I'd had in a week. The pain medication ran out on a Wednesday. I asked Diana to pick up the refill. "I'll try to get it tomorrow, Dad. The office is crazy right now." Thursday came. No refill. Friday morning I asked Bryce. "Oh yeah, I'll grab that. Pharmacy's right by the dealership." Friday evening, no refill. Saturday, no refill. Sunday I called the pharmacy myself from the guest room phone and arranged a delivery. The medication arrived Monday afternoon, 3 days after it should have. 3 days of managing surgical recovery with nothing stronger than Tylenol. I didn't complain. Complaining would have given Bryce ammunition for his narrative. The old man's in pain. The old man's confused. The old man needs someone to manage his affairs. I managed my own affairs. I always had. On a Thursday afternoon, week 5, I called through the doorway to Diana in the kitchen. I need to reach Maggie Fontaine. Could you hand me the phone book? Or help me find her number? Bryce materialized in the hallway before Diana could answer. I hadn't heard him come home. Maggie who? Marguerite Fontaine, my attorney. What do you need a lawyer for? Business matters. I can handle the paperwork, Amos. Save you the trouble. Save you the legal fees, too. I appreciate that. I'd rather call Maggie. His jaw worked. The smile was gone now. No performance. No, just trying to help, sir. Just a man whose offer had been declined twice and who didn't like the pattern. Suit yourself, he said. He turned and walked back toward the living room. I heard him pick up his phone, heard the screen tap as his thumb moved across it. Diana brought me the phone book 5 minutes later. She didn't meet my eyes. Bryce's gambling showed itself the way wood rot shows itself. Not all at once. In patches. In soft spots you notice only when you press. He checked his phone every 3 minutes at dinner. Not reading messages. Refreshing something. His thumb would swipe down, hold, release. Swipe, hold, release. The same motion. Over and over. His eyes would dart to the screen, process whatever he saw, then return to the conversation, a half-beat late. One Tuesday evening, week 4, Bryce came home with flowers for Diana. Yellow roses, the kind you buy from the bucket at the grocery store. He kissed her cheek, set the flowers on the counter, and announced he was taking everyone out for dinner. What's the occasion? Diana asked. No occasion. Just feeling good. He felt good. He glowed with it. His posture was loose, his smile genuine for once, his voice a register higher than usual. He ordered appetizers and dessert and left a 30% tip. 2 days later, Thursday, Theo asked at dinner if they were ordering pizza. What? Bryce snapped. Pizza. Mom said, maybe we'd. Does this look like a pizza night to you? Bryce's voice cut sideways. His face was gray, jaw muscles bunched. I've been at work all day. Can I sit down for 5 minutes before everybody starts making demands? Theo went quiet. Diana looked at her plate. I watched Bryce from across the table. The gray face. The locked jaw. The way his hand kept drifting to his phone and pulling back, like a man resisting the urge to check a wound. Tuesday flowers. Thursday fury. The pattern wasn't random. When Bryce's voice rose, Diana cleared plates. When his mood crashed, she turned on the television. When Theo looked at her with questions in his eyes, she changed the subject. It hurt me to watch. She had Lena's stubbornness, but not her willingness to look at what was right in front of her. Lena would have torn the phone from Bryce's hand and read every message on it. But Lena was gone, and Diana was her own person, and I was in no position to fix what she refused to see. Theo told me about the trucks. Week 5, a Saturday afternoon. He sat on the guest room floor with his phone in his hand, thumb hovering over the screen. Grandpa. Yeah? Dad had people at the workshop again. When? 3 times this week. Tuesday, Wednesday, and today. He paused. The first time, I didn't think to take pictures. That was the day of your surgery. But after that, I started taking them. He turned his phone toward me. The screen showed a photograph taken from his upstairs bedroom window. The angle looked down across the subdivision's back boundary toward the workshop access road. A rented box truck sat in the driveway, its rear door rolled up. 2 men in work gloves carried a piece of furniture across the gravel. Between them, directing with one hand and holding his phone with the other, stood Bryce. Even from the distance, I could identify the piece. Cherry. 8 chairs visible inside the truck bed. An extension leaf leaning against the tailgate. A dining set. Theo swiped to the next photograph. Same truck, different angle. Bryce pointing toward the showroom door. The movers heading back inside. Next photograph. A different day, different truck. Bryce loading what looked like a credenza wrapped in moving blankets. The movers handled it wrong. Flat on its back, not on its side. The finish would scratch. Next photograph. Third day. The movers carrying something long and flat, pew-shaped. My stomach turned. 14 photographs in total. 3 days. Each one time-stamped in the phone's metadata. Each one taken from the same upstairs window. Each one showing Bryce directing the removal of furniture from a workshop he had no authority to enter. "I didn't know if I should tell you," Theo said. His voice was steady, but his hands weren't. "You said no one should touch the workshop. But Dad was there, and I thought maybe he got permission, but you said no. I heard you say no at dinner. You did the right thing. I took the pictures because it felt wrong. You always said, when something feels wrong, document it." "Yeah," he swallowed. "Is Dad stealing from you?" I looked at my grandson, 14 years old, carrying photographs on his phone that could send his own father to prison. His hands trembled against the phone case. "I don't know yet," I said, "but I'm going to find out." "What should I do?" "Nothing. Keep the photographs. Don't delete them. Don't show them to anyone. Not your mother. Not your father. Not your friends. Okay. And Theo." "Yeah? Your grandmother would be proud of you." His jaw tightened. He nodded once, picked up his backpack, and left the room. I asked Diana to take me to the workshop. A Wednesday morning, week 6. My back was stable enough for short drives. The surgeon had cleared me for light activity. "You're not ready, Dad." Diana stood in the kitchen doorway with her car keys in one hand and her dental office badge in the other. "Bryce is keeping an eye on things." The words landed flat. Bryce is keeping an eye on things. Like telling me someone else was tending my workbench. "I'd like to check on the inventory," I said. "There's nothing to check." Bryce said, "Everything's fine." "Diana." "Dad, please. I'm late. We'll go this weekend." She left. The front door closed. Her car backed out of the driveway. We did not go that weekend, or the weekend after. Bryce had positioned himself between me and the workshop as cleanly as if he'd built a wall. He controlled the access. He controlled the information. Diana relayed his version of events without question, because questioning would require looking, and looking would require seeing, and seeing would require acting. I noted the deflection. I noted the phrase, "Bryce is keeping an eye on things," and I did not press the issue. Pressing would have traveled from Diana's mouth to Bryce's ear before sunset. That night, I lay in the guest room with the lights off. The house was quiet, except for the furnace and the drip upstairs. Bryce had come home late again. I heard the front door, the kitchen chair scraping the tile, the beer cap. Then his phone. He didn't keep his voice down. He was riding something, some high that made him careless, the way the Tuesday flowers made him generous. "Sold the last 3 sets this morning." A pause. I could hear the grin in his voice. The shaker dining table, the walnut credenza, and the matching hutch. My hands gripped the blanket. The shaker dining table was serial number 179C8. The walnut credenza was serial number 18831. The matching hutch was 18832. I'd built the credenza and hutch as a pair in the winter after Lena died. Worked through Christmas on the hutch because the house was too quiet to sit in. 32 grand in my account by Friday. He said it the way a man says he won the lottery. Light. The voice of someone who believes he's gotten away with it. I heard him lean back in the kitchen chair. The wood creaked. My kitchen chair, in my daughter's kitchen, bearing the weight of the man who was selling my life's work piece by piece to cover gambling debts. I lay in the dark. My back ached against the mattress. The room was 62 degrees. The temperature inside me dropped to match the room, then kept dropping. What replaced the warmth was not cold. It was clarity. The kind that comes when you stop hoping a joint will hold and start measuring the failure. The catalog ledger sat in the fireproof lockbox in my home office. Every serial number, every piece, every brass nameplate hidden inside, every joint I'd ever cut. Maggie Fontaine's number was in my phone. The LLC operating agreement, page 7, clause 4. Dual signature notarization. No exceptions. Bryce had sold my furniture, my work, my name stamped in brass where he never thought to look. I did not call anyone that night. I did not move. I lay in the dark guest room of my daughter's house, in a bed that wasn't mine, in a room that smelled like Bengay and neglect, and I let the clarity settle. The way shellac settles into grain. Slow, permanent. I began. 6 weeks after the surgery, I could drive. Not well. Not far. But the surgeon at Firelands Regional had cleared me for short trips, and short was all I needed. Diana stood in the kitchen doorway that morning with her coffee mug in both hands, watching me pull on my canvas work jacket for the first time since the hospital. The jacket hung looser than before. 6 weeks of cold leftovers and paper plates will do that. Where are you going, Dad? The farmhouse. I need clothes. A few things from the office. I can get them for you. I know you can. Dad, you shouldn't be driving yet. The doctor said, light activity. Driving to my own house is light activity. She set the mug on the counter. Her fingernails tapped the ceramic. The same motion Lena used to make when she wanted to argue but knew she'd lose. I can go after work, Diana said. Her eyes shifted to the hallway, then back. Her fingers tapped the mug handle twice. She picked up her car keys and her dental office badge. Be careful. Call if you need anything. I will. She left. The front door closed. Her car backed out of the driveway. The house went quiet. I did not drive to the farmhouse. The workshop sat on a 2-acre lot on the east side of town, 15 minutes from Diana's subdivision, if you took Route 250 to the county road. I took the back way through residential streets because my back seized twice at stop signs, and I needed the slower pace. November in Sandusky. The sky was the color of old sheet metal, low and flat, pressing down on the rooftops. The trees along the county road had dropped their leaves weeks ago. Everything was gray and bare and honest in the way that only late autumn in northern Ohio can be. I turned onto the workshop drive and parked beside the sliding barn door. Gravel crunched under the tires. The sound used to mean I was home. Now it meant something else. Getting out of the truck took 45 seconds. I gripped the door frame, swung my legs out, planted my boots, and pushed upward with both arms. My lower back locked halfway through the motion. I stood bent at a 15-degree angle, hands braced on the truck bed, waiting for the muscle to release. 30 seconds. It released. I straightened. The workshop looked the same from outside. Post and beam construction. White oak frame I'd cut myself from logs hauled out of Norwalk 40 years ago. The sliding barn door was closed, but not padlocked. I'd left my key with Diana the morning of the surgery, and she'd given it to Bryce. Of course she had. I slid the door open. The rollers caught for a moment, then gave way with a grinding sound that meant someone had opened and closed this door many times while I was gone. The showroom was empty. Not empty the way a room is empty when you move the furniture to one side for cleaning. Empty the way a shop is empty after a fire. The structure standing, everything inside gone. The warm pendant lighting still hung from the ceiling beams, casting circles of light on bare concrete where dining sets and credenzas and library shelving had stood for years. The handwritten Providence cards were scattered on the floor near the door, stepped on, bent, one torn in half. The smell hit me before the sight finished registering. Old sawdust, cold concrete. No fresh cuts layered on top. A workshop that hasn't been worked in smells like a tomb. The wood scent was still there. ghost traces soaked into the beams over decades. But nothing new, nothing alive. I stood in the entrance and let my eyes adjust. The display stands remained. 6 of them, custom built from the same white oak as the building frame, bolt into the floor with lag screws. They looked like pedestals in a museum after the exhibit had been removed. Each one carried the outline of the piece that had sat on it, a faint difference in the concrete color where dust had settled around the base and been cleaned by removal. I walked to the first stand. My boots echoed on the concrete. The sound traveled up through the empty space and came back distorted. The way sound moves in a room that's lost its dampening. When the workshop was full, the furniture absorbed noise. Cherry and walnut and oak soaked up footsteps and voices and the hum of the lathe. Now there was nothing to absorb anything. The first stand had held a cherry dining set. Serial number 227. 8 chairs, extension leaf, hand-carved apron. I built it in October 2019, 2 months after Lena's diagnosis, working through the fear the way I'd always worked through everything. 12-hour days on that set. The apron carving alone took 3 weeks because I wanted a running vine pattern that followed the grain instead of fighting it. Lena watched me carve the last section from her chair in the corner of the shop, wrapped in a blanket, her tea going cold on the bench beside her. The stand was empty. The provenance card lay face down on the concrete 3 feet away. I moved to the second stand. White oak credenza, serial number 231. Built for a client in Huron County who wanted something his grandchildren would inherit. I'd selected the lumber myself. 3 boards from the same tree. Grain patterns matched across the joined panels, so the front face looked like a single piece of wood. The client cried when he saw it. His wife had died that spring, and the credenza was going in the dining room she'd designed. He'd never picked it up. Paid in full, asked me to hold it until he was ready. He wasn't ready yet. Now it was gone. Empty. Third stand. The shaker table set. Clean lines. No ornamentation. The kind of work where every joint had to be precise, because there was nothing to hide behind. Shaker design punishes carelessness. Empty. Fourth stand. The walnut hutch with butterfly inlays. Lena's favorite. She'd sketched the inlay pattern herself, maple butterflies set into walnut panels along the doors. I routed the recesses, and she pressed the inlays into place with wood glue and a small mallet, working side by side at the bench the way we'd worked for 20 years. Gone. I turned from the showroom toward the main shop floor. The saw-stop table saw sat bolted to its concrete pad in the center of the room. Too heavy to move without tools. Too expensive to leave behind on purpose. Bryce's movers hadn't known how to unbolt it, or hadn't cared enough to figure it out. The Powermatic lathe occupied its corner. 800 pounds of cast iron and steel, immovable without a forklift, and someone who knew where the mounting bolts hid beneath the base. The lathe was still there because moving it required knowledge Bryce didn't have and couldn't buy from 2 men with a rented truck. Everything else was stripped. The wall-mounted racks, where my hand planes had hung for decades, were bare. Each plane had left its outline on the pegboard backing, a shadow where sawdust had settled around the tool and been disturbed by its removal. I counted the shadows. 7 block planes. 4 smoothing planes. 2 jointer planes. 3 shoulder planes. Heinrich's wedding gift, the German hand plane with the beechwood handle, was gone too. Its shadow was smaller than the others, but I could see it. 3rd row, second from the left. The chisel rack was empty. The jig cabinet was open, doors swinging. The dovetail jig, the mortise jig, the router template set, all gone. 40 years of accumulated tooling, some of it irreplaceable, carried out by men who didn't know a smoothing plane from a belt sander. I walked to the back room, where the inventory shelving stood floor to ceiling along 2 walls. Bare metal shelves. Every finished piece, every work in progress, every commissioned order waiting for delivery. All of it removed. Hundreds of positions on those shelves, stripped clean. Dust outlines on every shelf where pieces had sat for months or years. Each outline a different shape, a different size, a different story. The showroom held the display pieces. The back room held the rest. Between the two, the workshop had contained 214 serial-numbered pieces on the morning I went under anesthesia. Every one of them was gone. I walked back to the center of the shop floor and stopped. The pendant lights hummed above me. A spider had built a web between two ceiling beams near the lathe, something that never would have happened if the shop had been occupied. Sawdust doesn't mix with spiderwebs. I stood there for 11 minutes. I know because the clock on the wall, an old regulator I'd hung the year the shop opened, still ran. Its second hand made 660 sweeps around the dial, while I stood on that bare concrete floor with my hands at my sides. I did not cry. I did not call anyone. I did not sit down. I catalogued. The showroom pieces first. Serial number 227, cherry dining set. Gone. Serial number 231, white oak credenza. Gone. The shaker table set, serial number 1798. The walnut hutch with butterfly inlays, serial number 18832. Each display stand accounted for. Then, the back room. Commissioned orders awaiting delivery. Works in progress. Pieces held for clients who'd paid but hadn't picked up. The credenza and hutch pair I'd built. The winter after Lena died. Serial numbers 1831 and 1832, working through Christmas because the house was too quiet to sit in. Both gone. Each empty space had a number. Each number had a story. Each story had a brass nameplate hidden inside a joint where nobody would look unless they knew where to press. Bryce had sold furniture. He had not sold nameplates. He didn't know they existed. 214 pieces. 41 years of work. Every one of them carrying my initials stamped in brass where Bryce never thought to look. I left the workshop without locking the door. There was nothing inside worth locking. The drive to the farmhouse took 12 minutes. My back held. The roads were empty. I pulled into the gravel drive, parked beside the side entrance, and went inside. The house smelled the way a house smells when nobody's lived in it for 6 weeks. Stale air. Cold radiators. A faint trace of sawdust carried in from the workshop through years of boot treads, ground into the hallway carpet. I climbed the stairs to the second floor. Each step cost me. My hand gripped the railing so hard the wood creaked. At the top, I turned right into the home office. The room was untouched. The Heathkit SB-101 sat on its shelf above the roll-top desk, tubes dark, power cord coiled. Key SL cards pinned to the corkboard behind it. Confirmation postcards from operators in Michigan, Indiana, Wisconsin, Nebraska. The filing cabinet stood against the far wall, labels in Lena's handwriting. Tax records, 2019-2022. Invoices, AL. Invoices, MZ. Insurance? Legal. The fireproof lockbox sat in the bottom drawer of the roll-top desk, right where I'd left it. I pulled it out, set it on the desktop, turned the combination dial. 3 numbers. Our wedding anniversary. The lid opened. The catalog ledger. There. Brown leather cover, worn smooth at the spine from thousands of openings. I lifted it out and set it on the desk. The LLC operating agreement, drafted by Maggie Fontaine 20 years ago. There, bound in blue cardstock, Lena's handwritten notes in the margins of page 7. Original business formation documents. Tax records. Insurance policies. 41 years of signed invoices, each one bearing my actual signature with its distinctive leftward-leaning K and the connected A to M stroke. all untouched. Bryce had never entered this room. He'd looked through the open door once, seen an old radio and some filing cabinets, and walked away. What's all that junk in there? An entire lifetime of legal armor, cataloged and stored and fireproofed, dismissed as junk by a man who'd just stolen $200,000 of handcrafted furniture. I sat at the roll-top desk and opened the ledger. I turned pages until I reached the first serial number I'd matched to an empty display stand in the showroom. Number 227, Cherry Dining Set. 8 chairs, extension leaf, hand-carved apron. October 2019. The one I built while Lena watched from her chair in the corner. Missing. I took a pencil from the desk drawer and made a small mark in the margin. Number 231, white oak credenza. 3 matched panels. The Huron County Commission never picked up. Missing. Numbers 1831 and 1832. The walnut credenza and matching hutch I'd built the winter after Lena died, working through Christmas because the house was too quiet to sit in. Both missing. I worked through the ledger for 90 minutes, cross-referencing my memory of empty spaces against 41 years of entries. Each mark precise. Each serial number confirmed. 214 pieces across the showroom and back inventory. I noted the wood species, the dimensions, the completion dates, the original sale prices, the combined estimated retail value of the missing pieces, $212,000. I closed the ledger and placed it in the canvas bag I'd brought from Diana's house. I locked the fireproof box, returned it to the desk drawer, and turned the combination to 0. Then I left, drove back to the subdivision, parked in the driveway, carried the bag to the guest room, and set it under the bed. Bryce's car was already in the garage when I got back, early. He stood in the kitchen pouring a glass of water, still in his dealership sport coat. The collar of his polo shirt popped. "Hey, Amos, get what you needed." "I did," he nodded. "Didn't ask what I'd gotten. Didn't look at the bag." Dinner that evening. Diana had made chicken. Theo sat beside me. Bryce sat across the table, cutting his meat with the casual authority of a man who believed he was the head of this household. Halfway through the meal, he set his fork down and wiped his mouth with his napkin. "So, I wanted to mention something," Bryce said. He looked at Diana first, then at me. The smile was in place. "I've been managing some of Dad's business affairs while he's been recovering. Just keeping things running. You know, making sure the medical bills are covered, that sort of thing." Diana nodded. She didn't look up from her plate. "That's very thoughtful of you, Bryce," she said. Bryce leaned back in his chair. "It's the least I can do. Family takes care of family, right?" The refrigerator hummed. Nobody spoke for 3 seconds. He looked at me, waiting for the thank you, for the old man to pat him on the back and express gratitude for the son-in-law who handled things while he was down. I cut a piece of chicken, put it in my mouth, chewed, swallowed. "Pass the salt," I said. Bryce's smile held for a beat too long. Then he passed the salt. Across the table, Theo watched me. His fork had stopped moving. His dark eyes, Lena's eyes, were fixed on my face. Later, he would tell me he'd seen something in my face he couldn't name. I knew what it was. Preparation. I finished dinner, thanked Diana, went to the guest room, closed the door. 2 days. The first thing I checked was the workshop phone line. I picked up the guest room phone, dialed the number I'd had for 38 years. The number printed on every invoice, every provenance card, every piece of shop letterhead. 3 tones. Then a recording. "We're sorry. The number you have dialed has been disconnected or is no longer in service." Bryce had canceled the workshop phone. The business line I'd maintained since 1986. The number my clients called to discuss commissions, schedule deliveries, ask about progress on their orders. Disconnected. I hung up, noted the date, The second thing I checked was the business bank account. I opened the browser on my phone and logged into the PNC business account for Krejci Custom Woodworks. The password hadn't been changed. Bryce hadn't thought to change it because Bryce didn't know I banked online. He assumed a 63-year-old woodworker with a ham radio in his office still did his banking by paper statement. The account balance was $412. I scrolled through the transaction history. 3 deposits in the past 6 weeks, each from different buyer names I didn't recognize. October 28, $22,400. Source: Calloway Furniture Consignment. November 4, $18,200. Source: Northern Ohio Estate Sales. November 11, $26,400. Source: Lakeshore Antiques, LLC. Total: $67,000. Calloway Furniture Consignment. He'd named the shell after himself. The arrogance of a man who'd never been caught, who believed so completely that nobody was watching that he stamped his own name on the instrument of theft. Each deposit was followed within 24 hours by a withdrawal to a different account. Transfers to routing numbers I'd never seen. The money flowed in and out of my business account like water through a pipe, touching the walls for a few hours before draining somewhere else. The routing numbers had the structure of online gambling platforms. I recognized the pattern from what I'd overheard through the drywall. Bryce wasn't investing the money. He was betting it. I took screenshots. 8 of them. Every deposit, every withdrawal, every routing number. Saved them to my phone. Noted the date and time. $67,000. And those were just the transactions routed through my account. Whatever Bryce sold for cash, whatever he moved through channels that didn't touch PNC, would be on top of that. The third thing, the worst thing. I already had Theo's photographs. He'd shown them to me 2 weeks earlier, that Saturday afternoon, when he sat on the guest room floor with his phone in his hand. 14 images. 3 separate loading days. Bryce directing movers. Rented trucks. My furniture carried out like salvage. I'd told him to keep them, not to delete them, not to show anyone. But I hadn't copied them to my own phone. That was a mistake I needed to fix. Midnight. The house was dark. Diana and Bryce had gone to bed at 10:30. The furnace cycled off. The ice maker clinked. The drip upstairs measured seconds like a metronome. A knock on the guest room door. Not a knock. A tap. The sound a knuckle makes when it barely touches wood. I sat up in bed. Grandpa. Theo's voice. A whisper pushed through the door crack. Come in. The door opened. Theo stood in the hallway in sweatpants and a t-shirt, his phone in his right hand. The screen was off. His left hand gripped the door frame. He stepped inside, closed the door behind him, stood there. His hands shook, both of them, the phone against his thigh. I couldn't sleep, he said. His voice was low, controlled, the voice of a boy working hard to sound like a man. I keep thinking about the photos, about what Dad's doing. I looked at my grandson, 14 years old, 2 weeks of carrying what he'd seen, and the weight was showing. His jaw was set, the way mine sets when I'm holding something in, but the rest of him was shaking. Sit down, Theo. He sat on the edge of the bed. I put my arm around his shoulders. He was taller than I expected, almost to my chin. His body was rigid, the muscles locked the way they lock when a person is trying not to break down. You already did the hard part, I said. You paid attention. You documented it. That took courage. His shoulders dropped. Not a collapse. A release. The way a clamp releases when you've turned it 1 rotation past tight and finally back it off. We sat there for a minute, maybe 2. I need to copy those photographs to my phone, I said. Can I see yours for a minute? He handed it over. I opened the photo gallery. The 14 images were still there, arranged by date. Bryce, in the driveway, with the movers. The cherry dining set being carried across gravel. The credenza, wrapped in gray blankets, handled wrong, flat on its back. Each one time-stamped. Each GPS coordinate pointing to the workshop lot. I forwarded all 14 photographs to my own number. 30 seconds. Then I handed the phone back. "Don't mention the photos to anyone," I said. "Not your mother. Not your friends." "I know, Grandpa. You told me." "And don't delete them." "I won't. Go to bed, Theo. You have school tomorrow." He nodded. He started toward the door, then stopped. "Grandpa." "Yeah. Are you going to be okay?" "I'm going to be fine." He looked at me the way Lena used to look at me when I told her I wasn't worried. He knew I was lying. He accepted it anyway. He left the room and closed the door, and I listened to his footsteps climb the stairs and cross the upstairs hallway to his room. Alone. Midnight. 62 degrees. I opened my phone contacts and scrolled. Past the dealership numbers Diana had programmed. Past the pharmacy. Past the surgeon's office. Marguerite Fontaine. Estate Law. Columbus Avenue, Sandusky. My thumb hovered over the call button. 2 in the morning, Maggie would answer. She always answered. But this call would start something that couldn't be undone, and I would not start it from a guest room in my son-in-law's house, on a borrowed phone in the middle of the night. Tomorrow morning. My house. My landline. My terms. I set the phone face down on the nightstand and pulled the catalog ledger from the canvas bag under the bed. I opened it to the back pages, near the end of the entries. Lena's handwriting filled the last 30 pages, each entry in her careful, small script. The entries got less precise toward the end. Her hand was weakening. The letters grew larger, the lines less straight. But every entry was complete. Serial number, wood species, dimensions, date, buyer, price. The last entry in her handwriting, serial number 1, 1843. A set of cherry bookshelves for the Sandusky Public Library, dated 14 months before her death. The sketch in the margin showed the shelf profile, a simple line drawing that captured the proportions with 3 pencil strokes. Below the entry, in the margin, she'd written a note. I'd read it before, many times, running my finger across the letters the way I ran my finger across her brass nameplates. Her handwriting here was smaller than the catalog entries, as if she'd written it privately, after hours, a message meant for one person. Check the filing cabinet, second drawer, blue folder. Just in case. Just in case. 3 words that covered everything Lena couldn't say and everything she knew might happen. She'd seen Bryce from the beginning, seen the flat eyes behind the practiced smile, the handshake learned from a book, the way he looked at the workshop inventory, the same way he looked at the balance on a financing agreement. She'd structured the LLC to withstand this kind of assault. And then, when the cancer came and she knew she was leaving, she'd left something else. A blue folder in the second drawer of a filing cabinet in a room Bryce thought was full of junk. I hadn't opened it. Reading the note was enough. Opening the folder meant accepting she was gone. Tomorrow, I would open it. I closed the ledger and placed it back in the canvas bag. I turned off the phone. I lay back on the pillow in the 62-degree room and stared at the ceiling. Through the wall, the refrigerator hummed. The drip upstairs marked time. 214 empty spaces. $212,000. 67,000 routed through my own account. A canceled phone line. 14 photographs on my phone. A dead woman's margin note pointing to a folder I hadn't opened. Every piece carried my name. Every name matched the ledger. Every ledger entry was in Lena's hand or mine. Bryce never entered the room where it all lived. He never thought to look. Maggie's number was in my phone. The ledger was under my bed, The LLC agreement was in the lockbox, and in a filing cabinet in my home office, second drawer, a blue folder waited for me with 3 words written above it in my wife's handwriting. I closed my eyes. My back ached. The room was cold. Tomorrow morning, from my own house, I would make the first call. I told Diana I needed my own bed. 6 weeks on a mattress that smelled like fabric softener and neglect was enough. My back was stable. The surgeon had cleared me for light activity. There was no medical reason to stay. "Are you sure, Dad? I can." "I'm sure." Bryce stood behind her in the hallway, arms crossed, leaning against the wall with his phone in his back pocket. He didn't argue, didn't offer to help carry my bag. His face held that practiced concern, the kind he'd rehearsed for clients who needed reassurance before signing a bad financing deal. "You take care, sir," he said. "I will." He was glad. I could see it in the way his shoulders dropped half an inch when I picked up the canvas bag. The old man was leaving. No more guest room. No more thin drywall. No more risk of being overheard at midnight talking to bookmakers about point spreads. I drove home. 15 minutes on Route 250, then the county road, then the gravel drive. The farmhouse sat in November light, the clapboard siding gray against the bare trees. I parked beside the side entrance, cut the engine, and sat in the truck for a moment. Quiet. Real quiet. Not the manufactured silence of a subdivision where every house hums with appliances and buried secrets. The quiet of a place that was mine. I went inside, set the canvas bag on the kitchen table, and picked up the landline. Maggie answered on the second ring. "Amos, I need you at the house." No explanation, no preamble. We'd known each other 30 years. Maggie Fontaine, the estate attorney who'd been Lena's closest friend since before I married her, didn't require context when Amos Krejci called and said, "I need you." "I'm leaving now," she said. Her 12-year-old Volvo pulled into the driveway 41 minutes later. I watched from the kitchen window as she climbed out, leather satchel over one shoulder, reading glasses pushed up into graying hair that she still wore in the same French twist Lena used to tease her about. 58 years old, 5'4", with the posture of a woman who'd spent 3 decades telling probate judges they were wrong and proving it. She didn't knock. She walked in through the side entrance the way she always had, set her satchel on the kitchen counter, and looked at me. "Coffee first or trouble first?" "Trouble." "Then let's go upstairs." The home office was cold. I hadn't turned on the baseboard heater since before the surgery. The Heathkit SPI 101 sat dark on its shelf. QSL cards pinned to the corkboard. Filing cabinets with Lena's handwriting on every label. The roll-top desk where the lockbox lived. The old radiator ticked once against the baseboard and went silent. I pulled 2 chairs to the desk, opened the lockbox, and lifted out the catalog ledger. "Bryce sold the workshop inventory," I said. "All of it. While I was in surgery and recovering at Diana's house." Maggie sat down. Her face didn't change. She placed both hands flat on the desk, the way she did in depositions when she wanted to signal that she was listening with her full attention, and whatever came next would be used. "Start from the beginning." I opened the ledger. I turned to the first flagged entry, serial number 227, the cherry dining set I'd built in October 2019 while Lena watched from her chair in the corner. Missing from the first display stand in the showroom. 227, I said. Cherry. 8 chairs, extension leaf, hand-carved apron. Completed October 2019. Gone from the showroom. Maggie pulled her phone from her satchel and began photographing the page. The shutter sound clicked in the quiet office. I turned to the next flagged entry. Serial number 231. White oak credenza. 3 matched panels. The Huron County Commission never picked up. Missing. I turned the page. 1798. The shaker table set. Missing. I kept going. The process took 90 minutes. I read each serial number aloud. Maggie photographed the corresponding ledger page. We worked through the book in sequence, my pencil marks in the margins guiding us from one empty space to the next. When I finished, Maggie set her phone down and looked at the tally she'd kept on a legal pad. 47 pieces confirmed, sold through bank records and buyer trails, she said. $212,000 at retail. And those are just the ones I can trace. Over 160 more are still unaccounted for. The entire workshop was stripped. How do you know the value? I priced every piece when I built it. The ledger has the figures. And every one of these has a brass nameplate inside? Every one. Maggie stared at the legal pad. 47 lines. 47 serial numbers. Each one a piece of furniture I'd built with my hands, signed in brass where nobody would see, and sold by a man who never knew the signatures existed. She turned to the LLC operating agreement. I'd already pulled it from the lockbox and set it on the desk. Blue card stock binding. Lena's handwritten notes in the margins. Maggie opened to page 7. Clause 4, she said, reading aloud. No asset transfer, sale, or dissolution of LLC property exceeding $5,000 in value may be executed without dual signature notarization from both managing members, verified in person by a commissioned Ohio notary public. She looked up. I wrote this clause, she said. Lena asked for it. She was specific. She wanted a dual signature requirement, not just a single signer approval. And after Lena died, the succession provision reverts full managing authority to the surviving member. That's you, Amos. Only you. No one else can authorize a sale. Not Diana, not Bryce, not anyone. Bryce sold 47 pieces, without your consent, without my knowledge. Maggie's jaw set. She closed the operating agreement and placed it beside the ledger. The blue folder, I said. Her eyes moved to the filing cabinet against the far wall. Lena left a note in the margin of her last ledger entry. She wrote, check the filing cabinet. Second drawer, blue folder, just in case. Maggie didn't speak. She stood, walked to the cabinet, and pulled open the second drawer. The folders inside were organized by color. Lena's system. Tax returns in green. Insurance in yellow. Legal documents in blue. There was one blue folder I'd never opened. Maggie lifted it out. It was thin. 3 documents inside, maybe 4. She brought it back to the desk and set it between us. I opened it. The first document was a copy of the LLC operating agreement, the same one we'd just reviewed, but this copy was marked up in Lena's hand. Red pen. Arrows drawn in the margins pointing to the dual signature clause on page 7. Underlines beneath the succession provision. A note in her handwriting beside the clause. This means only Amos can authorize. The second document was a sealed envelope. White. Standard business size. Lena's handwriting on the front, for Marguerite Fontaine, to be opened if needed. I handed it to Maggie. She held it for a moment, turning it over. The seal was intact. Lena had closed this envelope, licked the glue, pressed it shut. Her hands had held this paper. The paper still smelled faintly of the lavender hand cream she'd used after the chemotherapy dried out her skin. Maggie slid her thumb under the flap, pulling apart the seal the way she'd handle a 40-year-old deed. She unfolded the letter inside and read it in silence. Her lips pressed together. Her chin dropped a fraction of an inch. She read it once. Then again, her finger tracking the lines the second time through. Then she set it on the desk and turned it so I could read. Lena's handwriting. Weaker than the ledger entries. Written later, closer to the end. Maggie, if you're reading this, something has gone wrong with the shop. I don't know what, but I know the shape of what worries me. Please watch over Amos and the workshop. He trusts too easily, and he doesn't read legal documents the way he reads wood grain. Whatever happened, the answer is in the operating agreement. Make sure he's protected. He won't ask for help, so don't wait for him to ask. Love, Lena. I read it 3 times. The handwriting blurred the second time and cleared the third. Maggie didn't say anything. She waited the way a good attorney waits, letting the client reach the words on his own. She knew, I said. She was careful. Careful people prepare for things they hope won't happen. I turned to the third document in the blue folder. A notarized statement, single page, typed on letterhead from Maggie's own office. At the bottom, Lena's signature and the stamp of a Sandusky notary public, dated 18 months before her death. Still lucid, still sharp, still thinking ahead while the cancer ate her alive. The statement declared, in plain language, that Lena Krejci had not granted power of attorney to any family member, associate, or third party regarding the assets, operations, or management of Krejci Custom Woodworks, LLC. I set the document down on the desk. Lena had seen Bryce, the flat eyes, the calculated smile, the way he looked at the inventory like it was already his. She'd seen what I'd dismissed as a son-in-law's social awkwardness and identified it for what it was: hunger. The kind that doesn't stop at what belongs to you. She'd structured the LLC to block it. When the structure wasn't enough, she'd left a letter for her attorney. When the letter wasn't enough, she'd drafted a notarized statement declaring in advance that any power of attorney was a forgery. 3 layers of protection, built by a woman who wouldn't live to see them used. How did he do it? Maggie asked. How did Bryce execute sales without your signature? I don't know. I'll find out. Give me 2 days. Maggie made calls. She contacted title companies, buyer's attorneys, county filing offices. She used the professional network a 30-year estate practice in a small Ohio city generates. The kind of network where clerks answer her calls on the first ring because they know her by name. 2 days later, she called me back to her office. Maggie's law practice occupied a converted Victorian house on Columbus Avenue. The hardwood floors creaked under my boots, and the old radiators gave off a dry heat that smelled of dust and iron. I'd been there 100 times over the years, usually with Lena, usually for paperwork that made my eyes glaze over. The conference table filled the old dining room. Ohio Revised Code volumes lined the built-in shelving. Framed photographs on the wall behind her desk, 3 of them featuring Lena at various events, barbecues, graduations. Maggie spread a set of documents across the conference table. He filed a power of attorney, she said, granting Bryce Calloway full authority to manage and liquidate all Krejci Custom Woodworks assets on your behalf. She slid the document toward me. 2 pages. Clean formatting. Standard Ohio POA template. I looked at the signature on the second page. My name, Amos J. Krejci, written in what appeared to be my hand. It wasn't. I pulled one of my own signed invoices from the canvas bag. I'd brought a dozen from the lockbox. I set the genuine invoice beside the forged POA and leaned over the 2 signatures under the desk lamp. The letters were close. Someone had studied my signature, practiced it. The overall shape was right. The size was right. Even the slight forward slant was right. But the details were wrong. The K, I said. My K leans left. Every time. 41 years of signed invoices in my lockbox. This one is straight. I see it. And here. I pointed to the connection between the A and the M. I never lift the pen between those 2 letters. This signature lifts. There's a gap. Small, but it's there. I'd signed my name thousands of times over 41 years. On invoices, on checks, on contracts, on the brass nameplates I stamped into every piece I built. Every document in the fireproof lockbox, every entry in the catalog ledger, every business record Lena filed, carried my genuine signature. 41 years of comparison samples. The forgery wouldn't survive 10 seconds next to any of them. But that's not the worst part, Maggie said. She pointed to the bottom of the second page. Below the forged signature, where the notarization appeared. A stamp. Round. Official format. The name in the center, Ruth Eberl, Notary Public, State of Ohio, Sandusky. Maggie's face lost its color. Her hand stopped moving over the document and went flat against the table. The professional composure she'd maintained through the ledger review, through Lena's letter, through the forged signature analysis, dropped away. What? I said. Ruth Eberle. I don't know the name. I do. Maggie's voice was level, but her jaw was tight. Ruth Eberle was a notary public in Sandusky for 22 years. She notarized real estate closings, estate documents, business filings. She was in this office dozens of times. Ruth died in 2023, Amos. Just over a year ago. Heart attack at her kitchen table. I went to the funeral. The room was quiet. A car passed on Columbus Avenue outside the window. The old Victorian radiator ticked as it heated. This document is dated 6 months ago, I said. Correct. A power of attorney notarized by a woman who's been dead for over a year. How did he get her stamp? Estate sale, probably. Second-hand shop. Her family may have sold her office equipment without knowing the commission dies with the holder. Or he stole it. Either way, he obtained a dead woman's notary stamp and used it to certify a forged power of attorney. And nobody checked. Most buyers don't verify notary stamps. They see the seal, they see the signature, they accept the document. Bryce was counting on that. Maggie sat back in her chair. Amos, this is not a family argument about who had permission to sell furniture. This is criminal forgery under Ohio Revised Code 291331. This is theft under 291342. And because you're over 60, this is financial exploitation of an elder under 291447, which carries enhanced penalties. Enhanced. Felony charges. Not misdemeanor. Not civil. Prison time. She pulled her phone across the table. I'm calling Sandra Voss at the sheriff's office. She handles elder abuse and financial crimes. I've worked with her on 3 prior cases. She'll take this. Call her. Detective Sandra Voss, Erie County Sheriff's Office, Elder Abuse and Financial Crimes Division, arrived at Maggie's office the following morning. 44 years old, with the posture of someone who'd spent her career walking into rooms where people didn't want her. Dark hair pulled back, leather portfolio, and a digital recorder. She sat at the conference table, opened the portfolio, and said, "Walk me through it." The evidence covered the table like a case file. Maggie started with the LLC operating agreement. Page 7, Clause 4. Dual signature notarization requirement. Succession provision, reverting sole authority to Amos. Voss took notes, quick, short marks in a spiral pad. Then the forged power of attorney. Maggie placed it beside the genuine operating agreement. The 2 documents side by side made the contrast visible at a glance, even to someone who hadn't spent 41 years signing the same name. The signature, Voss said, leaning forward. Walk me through the differences. The K, I said. My K leans left. Every time. 41 years of signed invoices in my lockbox. The forgery's K is vertical. I set one of my genuine invoices on the table beside the forged POA. The 3 signatures in a row told the whole story. And the A to M connection, Maggie added. Amos's genuine hand never lifts the pen between those letters. The forgery shows a break. Voss photographed both documents side by side. Then the notary stamp. Maggie produced Ruth Eberle's obituary from the Sandusky Register, dated December 2023. She placed it beside the forged POA dated 6 months ago. Voss stared at the stamp for a long time. "Ruth Eberle," she said. "I remember this case. She died in her home. Her family donated most of her office equipment to Goodwill." "Goodwill," Maggie repeated, "where anyone could purchase a notary stamp for $2. Voss picked up her phone and typed a note. "I'll pull her death certificate from county records. It's already on file. Verification will take an hour." I opened the catalog ledger. Voss watched as I turned through pages of entries spanning 4 decades. Serial numbers, wood species, dimensions, dates, buyer names, prices, Lena's sketches in the margins, my rougher entries after she died. 47 pieces confirmed sold, I said. Each one has a brass nameplate hidden inside an interior joint. Serial number, my initials, the date. The nameplate matches the ledger entry. That's how I can identify every piece Bryce sold. Voss ran her finger down a page of entries. "This goes back to 1984. That's when I started. And every piece since then has one of these hidden plates. Everyone." Voss's pen moved faster. Theo's photographs came next. I handed my phone to Voss. She swiped through the 14 images. Bryce, in the workshop driveway. Movers with hand dollies. Cherry dining chairs, visible through the truck's open door. A credenza wrapped in moving blankets. Each image time-stamped. Each GPS coordinate pinned to the workshop lot. "Who took these?" Voss asked. "My grandson, Theo. 14 years old, he photographed from his bedroom window." "During what dates?" 3 separate days. "All during my hospitalization and early recovery, when I was physically incapable of giving consent to anything." Voss set the phone down. "The metadata confirms the dates. Yes. The bank records were last." I showed her the screenshots from the Krejci Custom Woodworks PNC account. 3 deposits totaling $67,000. Calloway Furniture Consignment. Northern Ohio Estate Sales. Lakeshore Antiques, LLC. Each deposit followed within 24 hours by withdrawals to routing numbers I didn't recognize. "Believe the money went to online gambling," I said. Voss looked up. "I spent 5 weeks in a guest room adjacent to his kitchen," I said. Thin drywall. Late at night he'd make phone calls. I heard him talking about spreads, odds, doubling down. His mood swung between highs and lows on a weekly cycle. Flowers for Diana on a Tuesday. Snapping at his 14-year-old on a Thursday. Pattern consistent with gambling addiction, Voss said. The routing numbers on the withdrawals. 3 different accounts. "I believe they're gambling platforms." Voss wrote for 30 seconds without pausing. "Mr. Krejci," she said, "I'm going to request subpoenas for Bryce Calloway's personal bank accounts and for transaction records from the platforms associated with those routing numbers." "How long?" "A week. Maybe less. Judge Morrison handles elder abuse warrants. He doesn't sit on paperwork." "What do I do while we wait?" "Nothing illegal. Don't confront Bryce. Don't tip him off. Don't remove any documents from your home. Everything stays where it is. Understood." Voss closed her portfolio. She looked at the evidence spread across the table. The ledger, the forged POA, the genuine operating agreement, the dead notary's obituary, 14 photographs from a 14-year-old's phone. "This is the most organized evidence package I've received from a victim in 12 years, she said. "Most people come in with a complaint and a feeling. You came in with a case." Maggie didn't smile, but her posture shifted a fraction. She'd spent the last 30 years building case files. Lena had spent 20 years building the underlying documents. Between the two of them, they'd constructed a wall that Bryce never saw because he was too busy looking at furniture. I didn't wait for the subpoenas. 3 days after the meeting with Voss, I drove to Calvary Methodist Church on Route 2. Theo had mentioned it weeks ago, in passing, the way kids mention things. Dad sold some stuff to that church on the highway. I hadn't followed up at the time. I was still immobilized, still processing what Theo's photographs meant, but the words had lodged themselves, the way a splinter lodges in the pad of your thumb. You feel it every time you grip something. The church was a white clapboard building set back from the road. A gravel parking lot, half full on a Tuesday afternoon. Bible study maybe? Or committee meeting. Small churches run on meetings. I parked near the side entrance and walked to the fellowship hall. The door was propped open with a rubber wedge. Inside, linoleum floor, fluorescent ceiling panels, folding chairs stacked against the wall. Coffee urn on a counter. Sunday school materials on a corkboard. And 2 cherry dining sets. I saw them from the doorway. 8 chairs each, arranged around 2 tables pushed together in the center of the room. The wood caught the fluorescent light wrong, the way cherry always does, under artificial lighting. Cherry belongs in warm light. Pendant fixtures, incandescent bulbs, window glow. Under fluorescence, it looks flat. But the grain was right. The proportions were right. The hand-carved aprons running beneath the tabletops, with a running vine pattern that followed the grain instead of fighting it. My design, my cut, my work. The fellowship hall had 4 people in it, seated at one end of the joined tables with coffee cups and open Bibles. They looked up when I entered. I didn't stop to explain. I walked to the nearest table, braced one hand on the surface, and lowered myself to the floor. My back seized at the halfway point. I stopped, held my breath, waited for the muscle to release. 3 seconds. 4. It released. I knelt on the linoleum. I reached under the apron to the interior joint where the table rail met the leg assembly. The spot I always used. The same position on every dining table I'd built since 1984. My fingers found the recess first, a slight depression in the wood where the router had carved a pocket. Then the brass. I pressed my thumb against the nameplate. The metal was cool, the stamped letters sharp-edged even after 7 years. I read the raised lettering with my fingers, the way a blind man reads Braille. 3 lines stamped into brass. 227. Opt 2019, Ochka. Serial number 227. The cherry dining set I'd built in October 2019, while Lena watched from her chair in the corner of the shop, wrapped in a blanket, her tea going cold. The apron carving I'd spent 3 weeks on, because I wanted the vine to follow the grain. The set I'd catalogued in the ledger, and identified as missing from the first display stand in the empty showroom. Here, in the fellowship hall of Calvary Methodist Church. Under fluorescent lights, surrounded by folding chairs and open Bibles. I knelt there. My knees ached against the linoleum. My back pulled at the surgical site. The 4 Bible study members watched me from the end of the table. Coffee cups suspended. 3 months ago, I was lying in a guest room listening through drywall. Now, I was kneeling in a church, touching brass I'd stamped 5 years ago, and the metal still knew my initials. "Can I help you?" one of them asked. I stood. It took effort. I gripped the table edge and pushed myself up. "I need to speak with Pastor Newell." Pastor Jim Newell was 61, with wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of handshake that comes from decades of greeting people at church doors. He met me in his office, a small room off the fellowship hall lined with theological texts and framed photographs of church events. "Mr. Krejci," he said, "I know your work. We have your pews in our sanctuary. Beautiful craftsmanship. The 2 dining sets in your fellowship hall," I said. "I built them." "Of course you did. Your son-in-law sold them to us." "My son-in-law had no authority to sell them." Pastor Jim's face changed. The pastoral warmth contracted into something watchful. He set his coffee mug on the desk and didn't pick it up again. Each table has a brass nameplate hidden inside the joint under the apron, I said. Serial number 227 on one set. I haven't checked the other yet, but it'll be there. Every piece I build carries my initials and a serial number in a hidden location. He told me he was liquidating inventory, Pastor Jim said. He leaned back in his chair, hands flat on the armrests. For a retiring craftsman. He gave us a 40% discount. I'm 63. I'm not retired. I was recovering from back surgery. Bryce sold my inventory without my knowledge or consent while I was hospitalized. The color drained from the pastor's face. How much did you pay? I asked. $4,000 for both sets. $4,000. Retail value on a single 8-chair cherry dining set with hand-carved aprons was closer to $12,000. Bryce sold both for a third of one. I have receipts, Pastor Jim said. He gave me a receipt from something called Calloway Furniture Consignment. I need copies of those receipts and any contact information he used for the sale. You'll have them today. Mr. Krejci, I had no idea. I know. I walked back through the fellowship hall and checked the second dining set. Same procedure. Kneel, reach, press. My back seized again on the way down. I waited it out. The nameplate was there. Different serial number, but the same initials, the same format, the same brass I'd stamped in the same workshop where every surface now stood bare. From the church parking lot, I called Maggie. I found the first ones, I said. Calvary Methodist, 2 cherry dining sets. Serial number 227, confirmed. The pastor bought them from Bryce at 40% of market. Jim Newell? He has receipts. He'll cooperate. Good. I'll coordinate with Voss. I hung up and sat in the truck. The church parking lot was quiet. A wind picked up from the lake and bent the bare branches along Route 2. Inside the fellowship hall, Pastor Jim was probably already making phone calls. A congregation of 200 families. By Sunday, every one of them would know. I opened the catalog ledger on the passenger seat and ran my thumb across the entry for serial number 227. Cherry dining set, 8 chairs, X'd. Leaf, hand-carved apron. Oct. 2019. Her small pencil sketch captured the vine pattern in 4 strokes. 7 years ago, I'd stamped that brass nameplate and pressed it into the joint and closed the wood around it. Signed my name where nobody would see. Not for money, not for pride, for the work itself. Heinrich's lesson passed from his hands to mine, pressed into cherry where only the wood would know. Now the wood had spoken. 1 week later, Voss called. Subpoenas are back, she said. Come to the office. I drove to the sheriff's office on the county road. Voss met me in the interview room, a bare space with a metal table and chairs that reminded me of the guest room at Diana's house. She spread printouts across the table. Bryce Calloway's personal banking records, she said. 6 weeks of activity. Deposits totaling $109,000 from furniture sales. More than the $67,000 that had flowed through my business account. Bryce had run some transactions through my account and others through his own, splitting the money trail the way a gambler splits bets. And here, Voss slid a second set of printouts across the table. Withdrawals. Every deposit was followed by transfers to 3 separate online gambling platforms. The platforms' names meant nothing to me, but the dollar amounts matched. Money in from furniture sales. Money out to gambling accounts. The cycle repeated every week for 6 weeks. Cumulative gambling losses across all 3 platforms over the past 3 years, Voss said. She tapped a highlighted figure at the bottom of the 3rd page. $143,000. The number sat at the bottom of the page. I read it twice to make sure the decimal was in the right place. My workshop inventory was worth $212,000. Bryce had sold it for $109,000, less than half its value, and lost more than all of it in 3 years of online gambling. The gambling had been going on for years before he touched my workshop. The furniture was gone. The money was gone. The gambling had consumed everything and demanded more. There's also this. Voss placed a final document on the table. Transaction records from what she described as an informal private lending operation. High-interest debt collected through persistence rather than courts. Bryce owed them $23,000. The full picture. A man who'd gambled himself into a hole he couldn't climb out of, borrowed from people who charged interest by the week, and looked at his father-in-law's workshop, the way a drowning man looks at a life preserver. $200,000 in handcrafted furniture, guarded by nothing but a deadbolt and an old man's trust. Voss gathered the documents and squared the edges. "Mr. Krejci," she said, "this is no longer your problem to solve. This is a criminal case." I nodded. "I'll coordinate with the prosecutor's office this week. Forgery, theft, elder exploitation, fraudulent use of a deceased notary's commission. Multiple felony counts." "I understand." I reached into the canvas bag I'd brought and set the catalog ledger on the table. "There's something else I need to do," I said. "The furniture is out there. 47 pieces confirmed sold, and over 160 more unaccounted for, spread across northern Ohio. Everyone has a brass nameplate with a serial number that matches this ledger." Voss looked at the catalog. She'd seen it before, in Maggie's office, but now she studied it with different eyes. The eyes of an investigator who understood that each serial number was a recovery target, and each recovered piece was an additional count. "I can find every piece he sold," I said. "I built them. I know what they look like. I know where the nameplates are. Give me a list of buyers from the bank records, and I'll map every serial number to every location." "That would be helpful," Voss said. I opened the ledger to the first flagged entry, 214 empty spaces in the workshop. Each one had a name stamped in brass. I began. Voss spent the next 10 days building a case that would survive a courtroom. I know because she called me twice during that stretch. Short calls. Procedural. She'd ask me to verify a serial number against the ledger, or confirm a wood species for a piece a buyer had described over the phone. I'd open the catalog on my kitchen table, find the entry, read it back. She'd thank me and hang up. The rest of the time, she was pulling threads I couldn't see. Coordinating with the Erie County prosecutor. Filing motions with Judge Morrison. Processing the subpoena, returns from gambling platforms that had taken my furniture money and turned it into nothing. Maggie worked the civil side. She filed motions to void every transaction Bryce had executed under the forged power of attorney. Ohio Revised Code is specific on this point. Stolen property returns to its rightful owner, regardless of whether the buyer paid in good faith. The buyers could pursue Bryce for their losses. That was between them and a man with frozen assets and a gambling habit. Bryce, meanwhile, kept going to work. I know because Theo mentioned it during one of our phone calls. Dad left early this morning. Said he had a training session at the dealership. Training session. Bryce was still performing the role. Still putting on the sport coat and the polo shirt. Still driving to Milan Road. Still, I was certain, pulling up gambling platforms on his phone during his lunch break. Still believing that the old man was recovering at the farmhouse, confused and defeated, while the workshop sat empty and the money trail grew cold. He didn't know about Voss, didn't know about the subpoenas, didn't know that every deposit he'd routed through my business account had been traced to a gambling platform and that every withdrawal carried his name. Didn't know that a dead notary's stamp had been verified against county death records and that the forged POA was now tagged as evidence in a multi-count felony investigation. He didn't know because nobody told him. Voss was clear about that. We build the case. We make the arrest. We don't give him time to run. On the 11th day, Voss called at 7 in the morning. Recovery operation starts today. I'll meet you at the Huron County address at 9. Bring the ledger. I brought it. The first stop was a farmhouse outside Norwalk, 30 minutes south on Route 250. A white 2-story with green shutters and a wraparound porch. The kind of house where families eat Sunday dinner at a table that matters. The owner was a woman named Patricia Garfield, 62, who'd purchased a white oak credenza from Bryce weeks earlier. She'd found the listing on a local marketplace site. The price was $4,000. The piece was worth $9,000. Patricia met us at the door. She'd been expecting us. Voss had called ahead. "It's in the dining room," she said. "I feel sick about this." I walked past her into the house. The dining room had cream walls and lace curtains, and a white oak credenza against the far wall, positioned between 2 windows where the morning light fell across its surface. I recognized it from 10 feet away. 3 matched panels on the front face, grain patterns flowing left to right like water across stone. I'd selected those boards from a mill in Huron County, the same county where the piece now sat. The client who'd commissioned it had never picked it up. He'd paid in full and asked me to hold it. He was grieving. I'd held it for 2 years. I knelt beside the credenza. My back protested. I braced one hand against the wall and lowered myself until my fingers could reach the interior joint beneath the top panel, where the side meets the back along a hidden rabbet joint. The brass was there. I pressed my thumb against it. 231, Feb 2020. Shia. Serial number 231, I said. February 2020. White oak credenza. 3 matched panels. My initials. Voss photographed the nameplate. She photographed the ledger entry. She documented the location, the buyer's receipt, and the price paid. Patricia Garfield stood in the doorway with her arms folded across her chest. "He told me it was from a retiring craftsman's estate," she said. 40% off retail. I thought I was getting a deal. "You are getting stolen property," Voss said. "We'll need to take possession. You'll receive documentation for a civil claim against the seller." Patricia nodded. She blinked twice and looked away. "I'm sorry, Mr. Krejci. I didn't know." "I believe you," I said. We loaded the credenza into a sheriff's department truck. Voss signed the chain of custody form. 1 piece recovered. 1 count added. The second stop was an antique shop in Lorraine, 40 minutes west on Route 2. A narrow storefront wedged between a barber and a tax preparer. The kind of place that smells like furniture polish and old books. The owner was a man named Dale Horvath, 55, who'd been buying and selling furniture for 20 years. He purchased 8 shaker chairs from Bryce as a lot. $600 per chair. Market value was $1,200. Dale met us at the counter, wiping his hands on a cloth. "They're in the back," he said. I knew something was off when the price came in that low. Shaker work doesn't move at 50% under retail unless somebody's desperate. Or stealing, Voss said. 8 chairs arranged in a row in the storage area. Simple lines. No ornamentation. Every joint visible. Every angle precise. I checked each one. Same procedure. Kneel, reach, press. My back locked on the 4th chair, and I had to grip the seat rail for 30 seconds before I could move again. Serial numbers. 198 through 205. 8 entries in the ledger. Each nameplate confirmed. Dale provided his purchase receipt, Bryce's contact information as listed on the sale, and a written statement. He offered to testify. 20 years in this trade, he said. I know when something's wrong with a price. 3rd stop. A Baptist church in Vermilion, 20 minutes north. Smaller than Calvary Methodist, but built from the same template. White clapboard, gravel lot. A fellowship hall, where 2 oak pews had been positioned against the wall beneath a bulletin board, covered in prayer requests and potluck sign-up sheets. Church pews. I built those for a client in 2012 who'd commissioned them as a memorial for his wife. He donated them to a church that later closed. The pews went into storage. Bryce found them in the workshop and sold them for $800 each. Memorial pews, built to honor a dead woman's memory. Sold for pocket change. I checked the kneeler joints. Serial numbers 1C7 and 88. The brass was cold against my thumb. The pastor of the Vermilion Church, a young man named David Kern, handed over his receipt and asked if there was anything else he could do. "Pray for my grandson," I said. "He's 14. This is going to be hard on him." At a farmhouse in Amherst, I found a cherry hutch with butterfly inlays. Serial number 1832. The one I'd built the winter after Lena died, with her inlay design pressed into the walnut doors. The buyer, a retired teacher named Carol Myers, started crying when I showed her the nameplate. "My husband bought this for our anniversary," she said. "He said it was handcrafted. That's why the price seemed like a bargain." I didn't tell her about Lena's sketch in the ledger. I didn't tell her that the butterfly inlay pattern came from my wife's pencil on a November afternoon when the cancer was already eating her alive and she still had the strength to draw. Some things belong to the wood. 7 locations in 1 week. The procedure was the same at each one. I'd walk in with the ledger under my arm. I'd identify the piece from across the room. I'd kneel, find the nameplate, read the serial number. Boss would photograph, document, cross-reference. At a house in Huron, I thought about Theo while I was on my knees, reaching under a console table. 14 years old, carrying photographs on his phone that would put his own father in handcuffs. I wondered if he was sleeping. I wondered if he'd stopped shaking yet. Each recovery added a count. Each count strengthened the case. By the end of the week, 39 pieces had been recovered across Erie, Huron, and Lorain counties. 8 remained untraced, resold by initial buyers to unknown parties. Voss kept those files open. The 47 pieces traced through bank records were the priority. The remaining 167 would take months to track, if they could be tracked at all. Bryce had sold some for cash. Some had been resold. Some were gone. The geographic spread told its own story. Bryce hadn't sold locally. He'd scattered the pieces across 3 counties, driving 30, 40, 50 miles to find buyers who wouldn't overlap, who wouldn't talk to each other, who wouldn't recognize Krejci Custom Woodworks and ask uncomfortable questions. It was the strategy of a man who'd listened to too many true crime podcasts and believed he was smarter than every person profiled on them. The community found out the way communities in small Ohio towns find out everything. Through the church. Pastor Jim Newell addressed his congregation the Sunday after. I'd identified serial number 227 in the fellowship hall. 200 families. By Monday morning, the phone calls started. Frank Brennan called first. His family had bought a dining table from me in 1991, serial number 47. 2 years ago, he'd purchased a second table from a man claiming to represent my shop. He'd been surprised by the price, 35% below my usual rates. But the work looked right. "It's sitting in my dining room, Amos," Frank said. "I'll have it ready for pickup whenever you need it." Helen Kowalski called that afternoon. She'd bought a set of end tables. She had the receipt. She'd cooperate with the detective. Ed Chambers, who owned a hardware store on Perkins Avenue that had been a competitor of my parents' shop 50 years ago, called to say he purchased a walnut bookcase from Bryce at what he now realized was a suspicious price. 3 buyers from my original client network reaching out on their own, providing receipts and witness statements without being asked. People who'd sat in my workshop over the years described the table their family would gather around and trusted me to build it. People who recognized the work and were angry at Bryce for what he'd done. Each voluntary return came with documentation Voss added to the file. Additional receipts, buyer statements, testimony from people who knew Amos Krejci's work and could verify that Bryce Calloway had no authority to sell it. The file grew thicker. The count rose. After the last recovery that week, Maggie made her move. She served Diana the civil notice on a Tuesday at the dental office. Maggie knew Diana's work schedule, knew the office layout, knew that Diana would be at the front desk between patients at 2:15. She walked in at 2:16, set the envelope on the counter, and said, "Diana, this is from my office regarding your father's property. You'll want to read it before you go home." Diana called me 30 minutes later. I was at the farmhouse, sitting at the kitchen table with the ledger and a cup of coffee that had gone cold. "Dad," her voice shook. "Dad, what is this?" "Maggie just served me papers at work." "You should read them." "I'm reading them. This says Bryce is being investigated for theft and forgery." "Dad, tell me this isn't real." "It's real. He wouldn't do this. He told me he was managing things. He said the medical bills." "Diana." She went quiet. "I gave you the chance to see it. You chose not to look. That's not fair. I didn't know what he was. Did he ever tell you where the money for the new kitchen appliances came from?" Silence. "The ones installed while I was in your guest room." The phone line held nothing but her breathing. Quick, shallow. The breathing of a woman whose excuses had just been stripped down to the frame. She knew, not the details, not the scale, but the shape of it. The way I'd known the shape of Bryce's gambling from fragments through drywall. The new appliances, the cash for Theo's braces. The way Bryce's mood swung between flowers and fury. She'd seen it the same way I saw bad grain in a board. The signs were there. She chose not to read them. I waited. Diana said nothing. "Maggie's office has the details," I said. "Read the documents." I hung up. 38 minutes later, my phone rang again. Not Diana. Bryce. I didn't answer. I knew where he'd go. I drove to the workshop. The November sky sat low over the county road, pressing gray light through the bare tree branches. The farmhouse was behind me. The workshop was ahead. I pulled into the gravel lot and parked beside the sliding barn door, the same spot where I'd parked 6 weeks earlier and found $200,000 of furniture replaced by shadow outlines and scattered provenance cards. The workshop was still empty. The saw stop bolted to its pad. The Powermatic lathe in its corner. Pendant lights casting circles on bare concrete. But today, the emptiness served a different purpose. Today, the empty shop floor was a courtroom, and the evidence was in my canvas bag. I stood in the center of the floor and waited. 12 minutes. Then gravel crunched outside. A car door slammed. Not shut. Slammed. Bryce came through the sliding door at a pace that was half walk, half charge. His dealership sport coat was unbuttoned. His polo shirt was untucked on one side. His face was red from the collar up. "What the hell is this?" He held his phone up, screen facing me. Diana's name on the call log. "Diana calls me at work, hysterical, saying you're suing me? Saying there's an investigation?" "What investigation?" I said nothing. "This is a misunderstanding." He started pacing, 5 steps left, 5 steps right, the way he paced in the kitchen at midnight when the gambling went wrong. "I had authorization. I was handling things while you were down. Why would I forge anything? That doesn't even make sense." He kept going. The words came fast, the way they came when he was closing a financing deal at the dealership. Hands moving. Voice rising. The salesman's pitch, polished and practiced, designed to overwhelm with volume what it lacked in substance. "You were in the hospital, Amos. Somebody had to manage the inventory. The market was moving. You can't just let 200 grand sit in a barn and expect it to hold value. I was doing you a favor. I was helping this family. I let him talk. 3 minutes. Maybe longer. The words bounced off the bare concrete walls and came back thin and hollow. When he stopped, his chest was heaving. His upper lip carried a sheen of sweat. "Bryce," I said, "sit down." He didn't sit, but he stopped pacing. I reached into the canvas bag on the workbench and pulled out the first document. "This is the power of attorney you filed with Erie County," I said. I laid it flat on the bench between us. "Granting yourself full authority to liquidate Krejci Custom Woodworks assets on my behalf." He glanced at it. "That's right. I had. This is not my signature." He stopped. I set one of my invoices next to the forged document. 41 years of the same hand. The difference was visible in 2 seconds. The K leaning left on every genuine signature I'd ever written. The forgery's K standing straight. The connection between the A and the M, unbroken in my hand, lifted in his. 41 years of signed invoices in my lockbox, I said. Everyone matches. This one doesn't. Bryce stared at the 2 documents side by side. I pulled the second document from the bag. The LLC operating agreement, blue card stock binding. I opened it to page 7. Clause 4. No asset transfer exceeding $5,000 without dual signature notarization from both managing members. Lena insisted on it. After she died, the authority reverted to me. Only me. You had no consent. You had no right. I set the operating agreement beside the forged POA. 3 documents on the workbench. Then I pulled out the 4th. Ruth Aberle, I said. The color that had been flushed with anger drained out of Bryce's face. What replaced it was the pale yellow of raw pine. This is her death certificate, I said. Ruth Aberle, Sandusky, Ohio. Notary public for 22 years. Died December 2023. Heart attack at her kitchen table. I laid the death certificate beside the forged POA and pointed to the notary stamp at the bottom. The stamp on your forged document belongs to a woman who has been dead for 3 years. You bought it at Goodwill, or you stole it from her estate sale. Either way, you used a dead woman's commission to certify a document that was already a forgery. Bryce's mouth opened. Nothing came out. I opened the catalog ledger. The pages fell to the marked entry with the ease of a book that has been opened to the same place many times. Serial number 227, I said. Cherry dining set. 8 chairs. Extension leaf. Hand-carved apron. October 2019. I built this set while Lena sat in the corner of the shop watching me carve the vine pattern. 3 weeks on the apron alone. I looked up from the ledger. Currently in the Fellowship Hall of Calvary Methodist Church, where you had absolutely no authority to put it. Bryce grabbed the edge of the workbench. His knuckles went white. There's been a mistake, he said. The smooth patter was gone. The words came out broken, spaced wrong, the way sentences fragment when the person speaking them knows each one is a lie. The paperwork, I didn't. Someone else handled the notary. I can explain. You can't. I can pay it back. He let go of the bench and held both hands up, palms out. I'll get the money. Give me 60 days. 90. Whatever you need. I can make this right before anyone else. 39 pieces have been recovered across 3 counties. Detective Voss has documented everyone. The prosecutor has the file. Bryce's hands dropped. He stood there for a beat, chest still heaving, the bargaining dead on his lips. Then his jaw set, and his eyes went flat. Diana will never speak to you again. His voice shifted, harder. The threat of a man reaching for the only weapon he had left. You're destroying this family. Is that what you want? To lose your daughter over furniture? I looked at him. The sport coat, the polo shirt, the chunky stainless steel watch he was still making payments on. The blue eyes that had gone flat and desperate, calculating an exit that didn't exist. You're not destroying my family, Bryce. You destroyed yours. His face collapsed. Not a dramatic breakdown, a slow crumpling, like paper being compressed in a fist. The salesman veneer, the righteous anger, the threats, all of it falling away until there was nothing left but a 38-year-old man in a wrinkled sport coat standing in an empty workshop he'd gutted. I was drowning, Amos. His voice cracked on my name. I owed people. Bad people. You don't know what they do when you can't pay. I didn't know what else to do. I stood in the center of the shop floor, where 41 years of sawdust had been ground into the concrete by my boots and Lena's shoes and Heinrich's work clogs before both of them. The pendant lights hummed above us. The saw stop sat bolted and silent. The powermatic lathe held its corner. The old regulator clock on the wall ticked through the silence. Everything that was too heavy to steal was still here. Everything else was gone. You could have asked me for help, I said. I would have given it. The words landed on him the way a chisel lands when the grain is already split. There was nothing left to hold together. Instead, you stole 41 years of my life and scattered it across 3 counties. Bryce sat down on the concrete floor. Not a controlled descent. His legs gave out, and he went down, back against the Powermatic lathe's cast-iron base, hands on his knees, head dropped. His breathing was ragged. The sport coat bunched around his shoulders. I stood over him. My hands hung at my sides. No fists, no shaking, just the weight of standing in a room that used to mean something. Tires on gravel. The sound came through the open sliding door. A car pulling into the lot. Then a second vehicle, heavier. The crunch of a larger tire base. Bryce looked up. His face was wet. Detective Sandra Voss walked through the workshop entrance in a dark jacket and slacks, her leather portfolio under one arm. Behind her, a uniformed deputy from the Erie County Sheriff's Office. Young. Broad shoulders. His hand rested near his belt. Voss surveyed the workshop floor. Bryce on the ground. Me standing. The documents spread across the workbench. She nodded once, the nod of a professional whose timeline had held. Bryce Calloway, she said. Her voice carried no inflection. No drama. The tone of a woman reading charges she'd already filed. You are under arrest on charges of forgery, theft, financial exploitation of an elder, and fraudulent use of a deceased person's notary commission. Stand up. Bryce stood. It took him 2 tries. His legs were unsteady. He looked at me. I knew what he was looking for. A signal. A word. A gesture from the father-in-law that would call this off. The way fathers-in-law are supposed to protect family. The way old men are supposed to forgive, because that's what old men do. He was waiting for me to step in, to tell Voss there'd been a misunderstanding, to choose blood over evidence the way Diana had chosen comfort over truth. I said nothing. The deputy stepped forward. Bryce extended his wrists. The handcuffs closed with a sound that carried through the empty workshop the way a drawer slide clicks into its track. Metal against metal. Precise. Final. Voss read the Miranda rights from a printed card. Bryce stared at the floor. His chunky stainless steel watch caught the pendant light as the deputy guided his hands behind his back. They walked him through the sliding door and across the gravel to the unmarked car. Voss opened the rear door. The deputy placed his hand on Bryce's head and guided him into the back seat. The door closed. Voss returned to the workshop entrance. We'll need your testimony for the preliminary hearing, she said. Maggie will coordinate the schedule. I'll be there. She looked at the workbench where the documents still lay spread across the surface. The forged POA, the LLC agreement, the death certificate. The open catalog ledger turned to serial number 227. 28 years in this job, she said. I've never seen a victim build the entire case before we got there. Lena built most of it. Boss nodded. She turned and walked to her car. I heard the engine start. The crunch of gravel as both vehicles backed out of the lot and turned onto the county road. Then the sound faded, and the workshop was quiet. Not empty quiet. Not the tomb silence I'd walked into 6 weeks ago when every tool shadow on the pegboard accused me of leaving the door unlocked. This was the quiet of a room where something had been resolved. The concrete floor, the bolted-down machines, the pendant lights casting warm circles on nothing. I gathered the documents from the workbench and placed them back in the canvas bag. I closed the catalog ledger and tucked it under my arm. A sound behind me. Footsteps. Light. The tread of someone who'd learned to walk softly in a house where the walls were thin. Theo stood in the workshop doorway. He'd ridden with me to the farmhouse that morning. I'd told him we were checking on the shop. I hadn't told him what would happen. He'd watched from the doorway through the entire confrontation, through the evidence presentation, through his father's collapse, through the arrest. Standing in the same spot where Bryce had entered 20 minutes ago. His phone was in his back pocket, the phone that held 14 time-stamped photographs of his father directing movers to steal his grandfather's life's work. His hands hung at his sides, steady. Not the hands that had trembled at midnight in the guest room doorway when he'd brought me the evidence. Not the hands that had gripped the phone case while his voice worked hard to sound like a man's. These were different hands. The same hands, but holding something new. The weight of what he'd done and what it cost, and the knowledge that he'd done it anyway. Because something was wrong, and his grandfather had taught him what to do when something was wrong. I walked to the doorway and stood beside him. We looked out across the gravel lot where the unmarked car had been, where the deputy's cruiser had parked, with the tire tracks still pressed into the loose stone. "You okay?" I asked. Theo nodded. His jaw was set. His eyes were dry. "Grandpa!" "Yeah. Can I come to the workshop this Saturday?" I looked at my grandson, 14 years old, his mother's dark eyes. He'd watched his father get arrested, and his first thought was about the workbench. "Saturday," I said. "I'll have the lathe running." We stood together in the doorway of the empty workshop. The November wind picked up from the direction of the lake and moved through the bare trees along the county road. Inside, the pendant lights hummed above concrete that had held 41 years of sawdust and signatures. Most of the furniture was still out there. Farmhouses, churches, antique shops. It would come back piece by piece. 8 pieces were lost. 39 were found. The pegboard walls still showed shadows where every tool had hung. But the lathe was there. The table saw was bolted down. The catalog ledger was under my arm. And my grandson was beside me with steady hands. The Erie County prosecutor's name was Helen Marsh. 51 years old, wire-rimmed glasses, sharp enough to read a case file in a single afternoon. She reviewed Detective Voss's evidence package and called Maggie before 5 o'clock. Maggie relayed the conversation to me that evening at the farmhouse kitchen table. "She's bringing charges under 4 statutes," Maggie said. She had her legal pad in front of her, notes in her precise handwriting. Hers, ORC 29102, theft. ORC 2911343, forgery. ORC 2013-47, financial exploitation of an elder, and a separate forgery count for using Ruth Eberle's notary stamp. What's the difference between the 2 forgery charges? The first covers the forged power of attorney itself. The second covers the fraudulent use of a deceased person's notary commission. Separate criminal act, separate statute, separate count. I poured coffee. The pot was fresh. I'd started making it right again since moving back to the farmhouse. Hot. Strong. In a ceramic mug Lena brought back from a craft fair in Put-in Bay 12 years ago. There's more, Maggie said. The multi-county scope. Bryce sold furniture to buyers in Erie, Huron, and Lorain counties. Marsh is filing under Ohio's pattern of corrupt activity statute, the RICO equivalent. What does that mean? It means every recovered piece with a verified brass nameplate becomes an individual count, each one carrying its own weight at sentencing. I set the coffee pot down. Foss's tally so far, Maggie continued. 39 pieces confirmed, sold through bank records and buyer trails. 8 still unaccounted for. The 8 were resold by initial buyers to unknown parties. Voss has open files on all of them, but the trails are cold. Recovery is ongoing. 39 confirmed. 8 in the wind. And over 160 more from the back inventory still untraced. And because you're 63, Maggie said, the elder exploitation charge carries enhanced penalties. Felony level, not misdemeanor. What's the sentence range? Marsh estimates 8 to 12 years. Depending on the plea, the cooperation, the judge. 8 to 12 years. I turned the number over the way I'd turn a board, looking at it from different angles. Bryce was 38. He'd be 42 at the low end, 46 at the high end. I drank my coffee and said nothing. The subpoenaed records from the gambling platforms arrived at Voss's office the following week. She called me on a Tuesday morning to summarize. 3 platforms, she said. He started small. $50 sports bets 3 years ago. Within 6 months, he was placing $1,000 wagers on individual games. By the second year, he'd moved to live poker and high-stakes parlay bets. How much total? Cumulative losses across all 3 platforms over 36 months. $143,000. The number was larger than what he'd stolen from me. He gambled away more than my entire inventory was worth at the prices he sold it for. The private lending operation, Voss continued. 23,000 outstanding. These aren't banks, Mr. Krejci. These are people who charge interest by the week and collect through intimidation. 23,000 to loan sharks. 143,000 to gambling platforms. 109,000 stolen from my workshop. The numbers spoke for themselves. His legitimate finances, Voss said. Dealership salary was $62,000 a year. After taxes, about $4,000 a month. Mortgage on the subdivision house is $2,200. Car payment on a vehicle he refinanced twice is $680. Credit card minimum payments, including a cash advance, Diana never knew about, another $400. That leaves $720 a month for everything else. Food, utilities, insurance, a 14-year-old son. $720. And he'd been gambling away thousands every week. His court-appointed attorney reviewed the evidence yesterday. Voss said, called my office this morning. He's advising Bryce to cooperate. What does cooperation look like? Full disclosure of all transactions. Identification of every buyer he can remember. Assistance locating the 8 missing pieces. And a guilty plea. Will he do it? His attorney says, the forged POA with a dead notary stamp makes any defense functionally impossible. There's nothing to argue. The document is fraudulent on its face. The stamp belongs to a woman who's been dead 3 years. 39 pieces have been recovered with brass nameplates matching a 41-year catalog ledger. His bank records show every dollar flowing from furniture sales to gambling platforms. She paused. His attorney used the word indefensible twice. Bryce's assets were frozen by court order 3 days after the arraignment. The house was already underwater. The car, refinanced twice, had negative equity. The credit cards were maxed. The chunky stainless steel watch, the one he'd bought on credit and worn like a trophy, was catalogued along with everything else of value in the seizure inventory. The dealership fired him on a Thursday. Theo heard the details from a classmate whose father worked in the service department. The general manager walked in with the owner and a security guard. They gave Bryce 10 minutes to clear his personal items. He carried a cardboard box across the parking lot in full view of the service bay, the sales floor, and 3 customers waiting in the lobby. Several of those co-workers had purchased furniture from Bryce below market prices. Pieces they believed came from a retiring craftsman's liquidation. Detective Voss contacted each of them as witnesses. Some cooperated with visible relief, others with visible shame. Diana filed for divorce 12 days after the arrest. I learned about it from Maggie, who handled the paperwork because the Calloway family's financial situation made a contested divorce impossible. There were no assets to divide. There was only debt. I don't know if she filed because she saw what Bryce was or because everyone else did. The timing suggested the latter. Diana moved into a rental apartment on the south side of town with Theo. 2 bedrooms, 2nd floor. A parking lot view instead of the subdivision lawn. She'd told the dental office she needed a schedule change. Early shifts. More hours. The mortgage on the subdivision house would default within 90 days. Theo didn't speak to his mother for 3 days after the move. He told me about it on Saturday, his first day back at the workshop since the arrest. He sat on the same stool he'd used since he was 10, feet hooked around the rungs, hands resting on the workbench. She keeps asking if I'm okay, he said. Every morning. Every night. Are you okay, Theo? Theo. Do you need anything, Theo? What do you say? Nothing. For 3 days, I said nothing. His jaw worked. The same motion I'd seen in his mother. The same stubbornness. But underneath it, something harder. On the 4th day, she sat on my bed and said she was sorry. Said she didn't know what Dad was doing. What did you say? I said. I showed you the pictures, Mom. You told me to stop being dramatic. The words hung in the workshop air, the way sawdust hangs after a cut. Suspended. Settling. She cried, Theo said. She sat on my bed and cried, and I went to my room and closed the door. I looked at my grandson, 14 years old, carrying the weight of being right when the adults around him chose to be wrong. The photographs on his phone had put his father in handcuffs. His mother's refusal to look at them had cost her his trust. That was hard, I said. Yeah. It was also true. He nodded once. Diana came to the farmhouse on a Wednesday afternoon. I was in the workshop, standing at the bench where the Powermatic lathe still held its corner. 3 recovered pieces had come back that week. A cherry side table, serial number 432. A set of white oak end tables, serial numbers 58-8 and 58-9. I was inspecting the side table for damage when I heard her car in the gravel drive. She appeared in the workshop doorway, wearing her dental office scrubs and a winter jacket that was too thin for December. Her face was thinner than I remembered. The weight had started dropping the way it does when sleep stops coming and meals become afterthoughts. Dad, Diana. She stepped inside. Her eyes moved across the shop floor, taking in the empty spaces and the few returned pieces. The saw stop. The lathe. The pendant lights. She hadn't been in this building since before my surgery. I came to say I'm sorry, she said. I set the side table down and turned to face her. I didn't know what he was doing. I didn't know about the forgery or the notary or any of. When did you first suspect? She stopped. Her mouth closed. Her hands gripped the front of her jacket. Diana. When? The appliances, she said. Her voice dropped. The kitchen appliances. He came home one day with a receipt for a new range and a dishwasher. Paid cash. I asked where the money came from. He said a bonus at the dealership. Did you believe him? I wanted to. What else? Theo's braces. Bryce paid the orthodontist in full. $3,000. Cash. He said he'd been saving. And the workshop phone? Her chin dropped. He told me the phone company raised the rates and you'd said to cancel it. I didn't check. You didn't call me to confirm? No. Even though my phone number is the same one I've had for 38 years. She said nothing. I stood at the bench and looked at my daughter, 36 years old. Lena's dark hair. My stubbornness. She'd been offered the truth at 3 separate moments, new appliances, cash payments, a disconnected phone, and she turned away from it each time because looking would have required seeing, and seeing would have required acting. You have your mother's stubbornness, I said, and none of her willingness to face what was in front of her. Lena would have torn the phone from Bryce's hand and read every message on it before she let someone steal from this family. Diana's face crumpled. Not the controlled compression I'd seen in Bryce when the evidence hit. Something raw. The collapse of a woman hearing the precise words she feared most, delivered in a quiet voice that carried no anger. Anger she could have argued against. Truth she couldn't. I turned back to the workbench and picked up the cherry side table. I ran my thumb along the apron, checking for scratches from careless transport. There were 2, shallow, fixable. Behind me, Diana stood in the middle of the shop floor. I heard her breathing. Quick, shallow, the sound traveling through the empty space, the way it wouldn't have when the workshop was full. She left without another word. I heard her car start, the gravel crunch as she backed out. Then the workshop was still, and I began sanding the scratches from the cherry apron with 220 grit paper, working along the grain. Pastor Jim addressed the Calvary Methodist congregation on the first Sunday in December. I wasn't there. Maggie told me about it afterward. He stood at the pulpit and explained that the 2 cherry dining sets in the fellowship hall were stolen property, identified by brass nameplates hidden inside the joints, and would be returned to their rightful owner as part of a criminal investigation. 200 families in that congregation. By Monday evening, 3 additional buyers had contacted Voss's office. A couple in Huron who'd purchased a walnut writing desk, a retired firefighter in Castalia who'd bought a cherry bookcase, a woman in Milan who'd received a set of shaker side tables as a gift from her son, who'd bought them from Bryce at a flea market. Each one provided receipts. Each one cooperated without hesitation. The retired firefighter drove the bookcase to the sheriff's office himself, wrapped in moving blankets he'd brought from home. The recovery operation continued through December and into January. Voss and I developed a rhythm. She'd identify a buyer from Bryce's transaction records or from community tips. She'd schedule the visit. I'd bring the ledger. The procedure at each location was the same. I'd walk in, spot the piece from across the room, and kneel beside it. My back would seize. I'd wait. It would release. I'd reach into the joint, find the brass, press my thumb against the stamped letters. At a ranch house in Amherst, I recovered a walnut hall table I'd built in 2016, serial number 1722. The buyer, a retired machinist named Gerald Watts, helped me lift it onto the truck himself. His hands were scarred from decades of metalwork. He understood tools. He understood what it meant to have them taken. If I'd known, Gerald said, I'd have driven it back myself. I know. At an estate sale in Lorraine, Voss located a cherry rocking chair that had passed through 2 owners since Bryce sold it. Serial number 891. The current owner had purchased it from an online listing. She didn't know the history. She cried when I showed her the nameplate. At the farmhouse in Amherst, I found the walnut credenza and hutch pair I'd built the winter after Lena died. Serial numbers 1,831 and 1,832. The butterfly inlays Lena had designed were intact. The maple butterflies pressed into walnut panels along the doors, her pattern, her pencil sketch translated into wood and glue. The buyer was a young couple who'd furnished their first dining room with the set. They stood in the doorway holding their 3-month-old daughter, while I knelt on their floor and read the serial number from brass my wife's hands had never touched, but her mind had shaped. 7 locations, 7 kneeling sessions, 7 times my back seized and released. The brass was always there. 39 pieces recovered over 6 weeks. Each one returned to the workshop on a truck. I inspected every joint. Tightened hardware loosened by movers who'd handled the pieces wrong. Refinished surfaces scratched by men who didn't know what they were carrying. Cleaned each brass nameplate with a soft cloth until the stamped letters were legible again, serial numbers matching the entries in the ledger Lena had maintained for 20 years, and I'd continued after her death. The pegboard walls began to fill. Not with the recovered furniture that went back on the display stands and inventory shelves, but with the hand tools I'd replaced. New hand planes where the old shadows marked the wall. New chisels in the rack. New jigs in the cabinet. Not the same tools. You can't replace 40 years of use. Worn handles and blades you've honed until they hold an edge like a razor. But tools that worked. Tools that fit the shadows. The workshop was not the same. 8 pieces remained missing. Some of the recovered pieces bore scars from careless handling that I could repair, but not erase. The German hand plane Heinrich gave me at my wedding was gone, and no replacement would carry that weight. But the pendant lights cast their circles on furniture again. The lathe hummed when I switched it on Saturday mornings with Theo beside me. The shop smelled of fresh cuts, layered over decades of sawdust soaked into the beams. 6 months ago, I was lying in a guest room listening through drywall. Now the workshop was breathing again. Bryce's court-appointed attorney negotiated the plea over 3 weeks in January. Maggie kept me informed through brief phone calls. The attorney had reviewed the evidence file and reached the same conclusion Voss had described. The forged power of attorney with a dead woman's notary stamp. 39 pieces recovered, with brass nameplates matching a 41-year catalog. Time-stamped photographs from a 14-year-old's phone. Bank records tracing every dollar from furniture sales to gambling platforms. Testimony from Pastor Jim Newell, from Maggie Fontaine, from 7 buyers across 3 counties, from Gerald Watts and Patricia Garfield. Indefensible. The word Voss said his attorney used twice. Bryce pleaded guilty to 1 count of felony forgery, 1 count of felony theft, and 1 count of financial exploitation of an elder. The pattern of activity charges and the deceased notary count were folded into the plea in exchange for the guilty admission. The plea knocked the estimate down. 4 counts collapsed into 3. The pattern charges folded in exchange for cooperation and a guilty admission. Maggie said 4 years was the floor the prosecutor would accept. Sentencing was set for a Thursday in late January. The Erie County Courthouse on Columbus Avenue. A limestone building 3 blocks from Maggie's office. I'd been inside it many times. I'd built furniture for it. The morning was cold. 7 degrees. The kind of cold that northern Ohio produces when the lake wind drops below the tree line and the air turns to glass. Frost covered the windshield of my truck, and I scraped it off with a plastic card from my wallet before driving to the courthouse in my canvas jacket over a clean flannel shirt. Maggie rode with me. Theo sat in the back seat of Maggie's Volvo, driven by his mother. Diana had not spoken to me since the workshop. The courtroom was on the 2nd floor. I climbed the stairs and walked through the double doors and stopped. The gallery benches. White oak. Clean lines. Brass hardware I'd installed myself. I walked to the 3rd row on the right side and sat down. The wood was warm from the building's heating system. 26 years, and it still held heat. I placed my hand flat on the bench surface and felt the grain under my palm. Serial numbers 094 and 095. Built in 1998 for the courthouse renovation. Judge Harlan Whitfield had watched me install them. I'd routed the brass nameplates into the joints beneath the seat, where the bench rail met the support post. Same position as every other piece. Same initials. Same system. I was sitting on my own work. Maggie sat beside me. Theo sat on my other side. Diana was 2 rows behind, alone. The courtroom filled. Boss sat in the front row behind the prosecutor's table. Pastor Jim Newell was in the gallery. Gerald Watts. Patricia Garfield. 3 other buyers who'd come without being asked. Bryce entered from a side door in an orange jumpsuit, wrists cuffed in front. 2 months in county lockup had taken the boyish roundness from his face. His cheeks were hollow. The sandy blonde hair was unwashed, the styling gel gone. He looked at the gallery as the deputy guided him to the defense table. His eyes found mine and held for a moment. Then he looked away. Prosecutor Marsh presented the case summary. She read the charges, the evidence, the plea terms. Her voice was level, practiced. The facts needed no embellishment. The judge, a woman named Catherine Pruitt, 63, my age, reviewed the plea agreement. She asked Bryce if he understood the terms. "Yes, Your Honor," he said. His voice was thin. "And you are entering this plea voluntarily?" "Yes." Judge Pruitt accepted the plea and moved to sentencing. Bryce's attorney asked permission for his client to make a statement. The judge nodded. Bryce stood. His cuffed hands rested on the defense table. He didn't look at the gallery. "I have a gambling addiction," he said. "I started 3 years ago with small bets. It got out of control. I couldn't stop. I owed people money, dangerous people, and I made terrible decisions. I know what I did was wrong. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking the court to understand that addiction is a disease and I need treatment." He sat down. The courtroom was still. Judge Pruitt made a note. "Does the victim wish to make a statement?" she asked. Maggie touched my arm. I stood. I looked at Bryce. He was facing forward, but his head turned when I rose. The hollow face, the flat blue eyes that used to calculate and now just waited. "Every piece of furniture I built has a brass nameplate inside it," I said. "I put them there because I wanted every piece to know who made it." I paused. Not for effect. For the weight of the words to settle into the wood of the benches I'd built, the oak beneath my hand, serial numbers 094 and 095. You forgot that. You forgot that everything in that workshop knew my name. I sat down. Judge Pruitt looked at her notes for a long moment. Then she delivered the sentence. 4 years in state prison. Parole eligible after 30 months. Full restitution of $109,000 payable to Amos J. Krejci and Krejci Custom Woodworks, LLC upon release, and continuing until the obligation was satisfied. Bryce did not react. He stood when told to stand. He extended his wrists when the deputy approached. The cuffs clicked. Same sound they'd made in the workshop weeks earlier. Metal against metal. The deputy led him through the side door. It closed behind them. People stood, shuffled toward the exits. Pastor Jim caught my eye and nodded once. Gerald Watts shook my hand without speaking. Patricia Garfield pressed my arm as she passed. Diana remained in her seat, 2 rows behind me. I didn't turn around. After a minute, I heard her stand and leave through the rear doors. Maggie, Theo, and I walked out of the courtroom together. Down the stairs. Through the lobby. Out the front doors, onto the limestone steps. The January sun sat low and pale above the rooftops on Columbus Avenue. The air was cold enough to see my breath. The courthouse flag snapped in the wind off the lake. The daylight was already fading, the way it does in northern Ohio in late January, the sun barely clearing the rooftops before it starts back down. I stopped on the top step. Behind me, through the doors, the second-floor courtroom held my oak benches. Serial numbers 094 and 095. They'd been there for 26 years. They'd be there for 60 more. Carrying my initials in brass, where nobody would look unless they knew where to press. Maggie stood beside me, her leather satchel over one shoulder, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. "Send me your bill," I said. She shook her head. "Lena already paid it." I looked at her. She looked back. 30 years of friendship. 20 years of a promise, kept in a blue folder in a filing cabinet drawer. I nodded once. Theo stood behind us, hands in his jacket pockets, his dark eyes steady. He didn't ask if I was okay. He already knew the answer. We walked down the courthouse steps into the pale winter light. If you're rooting for me, please like and give my revenge a score from 1 to 10. 6 months after the sentencing, the workshop smelled like walnut. Not the ghost scent soaked into the beams from 4 decades of cuts. Fresh walnut, a plank of Juglans nigra I'd purchased from the mill in Huron County, the same mill where I'd bought the boards for serial number 231, the credenza that had traveled to a farmhouse in Norwalk and back again. This plank still carried the earth-after-rain scent of freshly milled heartwood, and when I ran the jointer across its face at 7 in the morning on a Saturday in July, the smell filled the shop floor the way it had filled it for 4 decades. The pegboard walls held tools again, not the same tools. You can't replace a hand plane you've honed for 30 years, the handle worn to the shape of your grip, the blade holding an edge so fine it disappears against the light. Heinrich's wedding gift, the German plane with the beechwood handle, was one of the 8 pieces that never came back. A new lie. Nielsen low-angle block plane I'd ordered from Maine hung where the shadow had been. Good steel. Good balance. But it didn't know my hand yet. The showroom held 31 recovered pieces under the pendant lights. 8 display stands remained empty. I'd removed the provenance cards from those stands and stored them in the catalog ledger, each one marking a piece I'd built and might never see again. The empty stands stayed. A workshop should remember what it lost. The workbench held my first new commission since the surgery. A walnut bookcase for the Sandusky Public Library, matching the set Lena had cataloged as her last entry. Serial number 18043. Cherry bookshelves, 14 sections, floor to ceiling. The library director had called in April, asking if I'd build a companion piece for the new reading room. Walnut this time. Different wood, same proportions, same joinery. I said yes before he finished the sentence. The bookcase was 3/4 complete. Frame assembled, shelves dadoed and fitted. The back panel glued and clamped. I was working on the face frame when I heard footsteps on the gravel outside. Light. Quick. The stride of a boy. Theo came through the sliding door with his backpack over one shoulder and a paper bag from the bakery on Columbus Avenue. He set the bag on the bench. "Cinnamon rolls," he said. "The lady gave me an extra one because I told her they were for my grandfather." "Smart," he grinned. 15 now. He'd grown 2 inches since January. His shoulders were starting to fill out the way mine had at his age, the way they fill when you start carrying things that matter. Diana had agreed to the weekend arrangement in March. Saturdays and Sundays, 8 in the morning to 6 in the evening. No court proceedings. No formal mediation. She'd called Maggie. Maggie had drafted a simple agreement. Diana had signed it and mailed it to the farmhouse without a note. The signature was enough. It was the closest thing to an apology she knew how to make. Theo hung his backpack on the hook by the door, the hook I'd mounted at his height 3 years ago, and walked to the workbench. His eyes went to the bookcase frame. "Can I try the nameplate today?" I'd been teaching him the routing process for 3 weeks. How to set the depth stop on the trim router. How to clamp the template in position. How to guide the bit through end grain without blowing out the edge. He'd practiced on scrap poplar, the same wood Heinrich had handed me at 17. His cuts were getting cleaner. "Get the router," I said. He crossed the shop floor to the tool wall with the focused walk of a boy who knew where everything lived. He lifted the trim router from its shelf, checked the collet, and carried it back to the bench with both hands. I'd prepared a brass nameplate that morning, blank, unstamped. I handed it to him along with a scrap piece of walnut and the routing template. "Mark your center line first," I said. He measured, marked, clamped the template. His hands were steady on the router. The motor whined as the bit dropped into the walnut, carving the recess for the brass plate. When he lifted the router clear, the recess was crooked. Not by much, 1.5 degrees, maybe 2. The left wall sat a hair deeper than the right. A professional would reject it. Heinrich would have said one word. Again. Theo stared at it. His jaw tightened. "The wood remembers the first cut," I said. "Make the second one better." He looked at me. Then he picked up a fresh piece of scrap, reclamped the template, and started again. The second cut was straight. On Tuesday evenings, I sat at the roll-top desk in the home office and switched on the Heathkit. The tubes warmed for 90 seconds, the way vacuum tubes do, a low hum building in the speaker until the receiver locked onto the frequency. I keyed the microphone. W8HE calling CQ on 20 meters. A voice came back from Lafayette, Indiana. A retired postal worker named Harold, who'd been on the air since 1971. We talked about skip conditions and solar flux numbers, and whether the new sunspot cycle would open the 10-meter band the way it had in 2001. That was enough. Lena's handwriting still labeled the filing cabinet drawers. I hadn't changed the labels. Saturday, late afternoon. The bookcase was finished. The frame stood upright on the bench, walnut grain running vertical through the stiles, horizontal through the rails. The dadoed shelves fitted tight enough to hold without glue. But glued anyway, because that's how you build something that lasts 100 years. One step remained. I picked up the brass nameplate from the bench. 1 inch by 2 inches. The same size I'd used since serial number W1. The cherry rocking chair for Pastor Alan Reed's wife, 41 years ago. I set the nameplate in the stamp jig and positioned the first letter punch. 1851. The stamp hit brass. Clean. The numbers pressed deep and even. Jewel, 25. 2 more strikes. The date set into metal. Aj. 3 letters I'd stamped into brass nearly 2,000 times. The A connecting to the J without lifting the punch. The K leaning left. The same hand that 41 years of invoices carried. I lifted the stamp, set it down. I picked up the letter punch for L. In 41 years, I'd never stamped another person's initials on my work. I positioned the L punch beside my initials, pressed the stamp into the brass. The letters sank into the metal, clean and permanent. Then KLK. I ran my thumb across the brass. Both sets of initials pressed against my skin. The metal was warm from the stamping, the letters sharp-edged, readable by touch alone. I carried the nameplate to the bookcase and knelt beside it. My back held. 6 months of recovery, 6 months of physical therapy, 6 months of standing at the bench and letting the muscles remember what they were for. The joint I'd chosen was the same position I always used. Interior rail, where the shelf standard met the side panel. I pressed the nameplate into the routed recess, tapped it flush with a wooden mallet, and closed the joint around it. No one would see it unless they knew where to look.